The sea stretched wide and endless. Its surface shone with a soft shimmer, touched by the pale light of dawn. Waves rolled gently toward the horizon, their rhythm unbroken, their sound steady and low, like a calm breath rising and falling. Far out on the water, where the deep blue touched the sky, the ocean stirred with something new. Foam gathered across the crest of a wave, bright and white against the darker surface. It swirled slowly, gathering more and more of the sea's breath. The foam spread outward, drifting, collecting, thickening until it became a soft cradle. From that cradle, a form began to take shape. The sea seemed to hush, as though holding still to witness. The foam curved and folded, rising with each swell, until the figure within grew clear. A woman luminous and calm, with eyes that reflected the sky's first light. Her skin carried the glow of dawn, warm and gentle, as though the sun had chosen to rest upon her. Long hair streamed behind her, flowing like golden silk, brushed by the ocean breeze. The waves lifted her carefully, carrying her closer to the shore. She felt the coolness of the sea's touch upon her skin, the salt upon her lips, the softness of the foam beneath her. Her eyes opened fully, and she looked around, taking in the endless horizon, the delicate line where sky and sea embraced. She breathed, and the air felt light, filled with a freshness she had never known before. A shell, vast and pearly, rose from the waves beneath her. The sea carried it forward, steady and sure. The woman stepped onto it, her feet touching the smooth curve of its surface. The shell glided, guided by the tide, as though the water itself wished to deliver her to land. On the shore, flowers began to bloom. Where the sea's foam reached the sand, blossoms opened, fresh and full, their colors bright against the pale ground. Soft grass spread outward, green and tender, stretching toward her path. Birds circled above, their wings catching the golden light of morning. She watched them with quiet wonder. Their flight felt familiar, though she had only just come into being. Her heart beat calmly, and yet there was a warmth rising within it. A sense of belonging, though she had no memory of what had come before. The shell drifted closer, and at last it touched the sand. The tide slipped away gently, leaving her standing on the shore. Her feet pressed into the earth for the first time, soft grains of sand slipping beneath her step. She stood still, looking down at her hands, her reflection glimmering in the shallow water. Her voice came softly, almost a whisper. "I am here." The breeze lifted around her, carrying the sound outward. It stirred the leaves of the trees nearby, and the branches swayed as if in greeting. The world seemed to listen, to acknowledge the arrival of something rare and new. From the sea foam, she had risen. From the shell, she had stepped onto the earth. She carried within her the calm of the waves, the warmth of the sun, the gentleness of dawn. She was beauty made living, love given form. The nymphs were the first to find her. They appeared from the groves and from the water's edge, drawn by the sight of her presence. Their eyes widened as they approached, and their voices fell into hushed tones. One nymph, her hair dark and long like flowing river water, knelt before the woman. "You are Boar the sea," the nymph said softly, "but you are more than sea and foam. You are light, you are grace." Another nymph stepped closer, her arms filled with flowers she had gathered from meadow. She offered them with lowered eyes, placing the blossoms at the woman's feet. Their fragrance rose into the air, gentle and sweet, surrounding her with a new kind of breath. The woman looked at them quietly. She touched the petals, feeling their softness. "They are alive," she murmured, as if realizing something that felt both new and known. "They honor you," a third nymph replied, her voice careful, her gaze steady. "You are Aphrodite." The name lingered in the air, carried by the breeze. Aphrodite repeated it, tasting the sound of it, letting it settle within her. The nymphs bowed their heads, for the moment of naming felt sacred, as though it had always belonged to her. Above, the sky brightened. The sun lifted higher, casting its glow upon her hair. The waves sparkled more brightly, their surface alive with light. The world seemed to recognize her, to lean gently toward her presence. Aphrodite walked slowly along the shore. Each step left a faint trace upon the sand, soon brushed away by the tide. She felt the earth's firmness beneath her feet, the softness of grass as she stepped onto the meadow beyond the beach. Birds fluttered close, their wings brushing the air near her shoulders, their songs rising in delicate tones. The nymphs followed, quiet and watchful. They brought robes woven from fine threads, shimmering like the surface of the sea at dawn. They placed the robes upon her, covering her in softness, light as air. She touched the fabric and felt its warmth, its closeness against her skin. She turned her gaze outward, across the hills and forests, across the water stretching endlessly behind her. She did not yet know the world, but she could feel it waiting. Waiting to be seen, waiting to be touched, waiting to be shaped by her presence. The nymph with the river-dark hair spoke again, her tone gentle but filled with certainty. "You are born of love. You will walk among gods and among mortals. Wherever you go, hearts will awaken. Wherever you step, life will follow." Aphrodite listened in silence. The words rested in her, not heavy but deep, like seeds planted in soil. She did not yet know their full meaning, but she felt their truth. Her eyes softened, and she lowered her head slightly, as if in quiet acceptance. The sea's voice rose behind her, a long rolling sound, calm and unbroken. It was as though the water itself called her name. She looked back, and for a moment she thought she saw faces within the foam, shapes of ancient power watching from afar. But the waves shifted, and the forms dissolved, leaving only the endless surface of the sea. Aphrodite turned once more to the land. The nymphs guided her toward the groves, their steps light, their laughter gentle, like ripples upon water. Flowers opened wider as she passed, their colors deepening, their petals stretching to the sun. Bees hummed low among the blossoms, their sounds steady, soothing, unhurried. The day moved slowly, each moment unfolding with quiet ease. Aphrodite touched the bark of a tree, feeling its roughness. She knelt by a stream, letting the cool water slip through her fingers. Every detail felt new, every sound fresh. Her heart beat with calm strength, steady as the tide. She felt no fear, no haste, only a growing sense of place, as though the earth itself welcomed her with gentle hands. By evening, the sky softened once again, the sun lowering into a warm glow. The sea reflected its colors, turning gold and rose and violet. Aphrodite stood at the edge of the meadow, looking toward that light. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. She did not yet know her path, but she knew she belonged to both sea and sky, to earth and light. She was Aphrodite, and the world had opened to receive her. And as the night began to rise, stars appeared one by one above the horizon. The air grew still, holding a sense of quiet promise. Something gentle waited ahead, just beyond the reach of her sight. The morning light stretched across the horizon, soft and golden, as Aphrodite awoke upon a meadow where she had rested. Dew clung to the grass, glimmering like small jewels, each drop catching the sun's warmth. The air was gentle and fresh, carrying the scent of blossoms that had opened during the night. She lifted her eyes to the sky, still touched with pale colors of dawn, and breathed slowly, letting the calm of the moment settle within her. The nymphs, who had remained near, rose quietly as she stirred. They had watched over her with patient care, speaking only in hushed voices while the stars lingered. Now they stepped forward with soft smiles, their hands filled with woven garlands of flowers. They placed them gently around her arms, her hair, her waist. The petals brushed against her skin, delicate and cool, their fragrance rising to surround her. "You are ready," one of the nymphs said in a voice like running water. "Ready for what?" Aphrodite asked softly. Her words carried no haste, only wonder, as though each sound was still new upon her tongue. "To be seen," the nymph replied. "The gods are waiting. Olympus will soon know you." The name carried weight. Aphrodite tilted her head slightly, listening. She had not yet walked among the gods. She knew only the sea that had borne her and the earth that now held her steps. Yet within her heart, the sound of the words stirred a quiet recognition, as though it was a place she had always been meant to reach. The nymphs guided her from the meadow toward the hills beyond. Their path wound through groves of olive trees, the leaves whispering faintly in the breeze. Birds called to one another from the branches, their notes high and clear. The sound followed them as they climbed slowly upward, the earth firm and cool beneath their feet. At the crest of a hill, Aphrodite paused. Before her stretched the sky, vast and bright. In the distance, high above the clouds, she could see the faint gleam of Olympus. Its peaks shone with light, touched by the sun, and its halls glimmered with a brilliance that seemed both distant and near. Her breath caught softly in her throat. She felt the height of it, the way it rose beyond sight, resting among the heavens. She stood still for a long moment, her gaze fixed upon it. "You belong there," a nymph whispered, her hand resting lightly upon Aphrodite's arm. "It is where your place will be known." Aphrodite nodded slowly. The thought of stepping among the gods filled her with quiet anticipation. Not fear, but a gentle wondering. How they would look at her, what words they would speak, how her presence would rest among theirs. They continued onward, the nymphs leading her toward a path that shimmered faintly in the light. It rose upward, not made of stone or earth, but of something finer, woven from brightness itself. The air grew still around it, as though guarding its way. "This is the path to Olympus," another nymph said softly. "Few may walk it, but it opens for you." Aphrodite lifted her foot and stepped onto the light. It held her gently, steady beneath her, yet soft as air. She walked slowly, her robe brushing against her legs, her hair flowing behind her with a quiet breeze. The nymphs remained at the base of the path, watching silently, their eyes filled with reverence. As Aphrodite ascended, the earth below grew smaller, the sea stretching wide and endless behind her. Clouds gathered at her side, drifting calmly, their edges glowing with the sun. She touched one with her fingertips, feeling its cool dampness, soft as breath. The sky opened above her, endless and blue, and she felt the stillness of it settle deep within. At last, she reached the peak. The halls of Olympus rose before her, tall and radiant, built of stone that glimmered like crystal. Pillars stretched upward, their tops lost in the brightness above. The sound of rushing water echoed softly, fountains spilling clear streams that shone like silver. Gardens bloomed across the terraces, their flowers rich in color, their fragrance drifting through the air. Aphrodite stepped into the courtyard. The marble beneath her feet was smooth and cool. The gods had gathered there, their forms shining with strength, each one distinct, each presence commanding. They turned as she entered, their eyes resting upon her. Zeus stood among them, his figure tall, his eyes steady as the sky in its power. His beard was touched with silver, his robes flowing like storm clouds. He watched her quietly, his gaze weighing and measuring, but not unkind. Beside him stood Hera, her crown gleaming, her eyes sharp yet calm, filled with the dignity of one who had long ruled beside him. Athena's figure was bright in armor, her eyes clear and thoughtful. Apollo shone with youthful radiance, a lyre at his side. Artemis stood nearby, bow resting lightly in her hand, her gaze quiet but unwavering. Hermes shifted at the edge, his staff in hand, wings at his sandals glinting faintly as he leaned forward in curiosity. Their voices murmured low among themselves, the sound like the turning of wind through leaves. Some looked at her with wonder, others with guarded thought, but all felt the weight of her presence. Zeus spoke first, his voice deep, steady, carrying through the courtyard. "You have come from the sea," he said, "from the foam itself, born not of mortal womb, but of ocean and sky. You are Aphrodite." The name carried across the space, firm and clear. Aphrodite lowered her head gently, her hair falling forward like a veil. "Yes," she answered, her voice calm though soft. "I am Aphrodite." Hera studied her for a long moment. "Your beauty is without measure," she said. "But beauty alone does not make one a goddess. What do you bring with us?" Aphrodite raised her eyes, meeting Hera's gaze. Her lips parted, and her voice flowed quiet but sure. "I bring love," she said, "not as word or promise, but as breath and being. Where I walk, hearts will awaken. Where I stand, life will grow. I carry it as the sea carries waves, as the dawn carries light." The words fell into the stillness, not loud, yet filled with quiet strength. The gods listened. Apollo tilted his head, his eyes bright. Athena's gaze narrowed slightly, thoughtful. Even Hermes stood still, his usual restlessness quieted. Zeus remained silent for a time. Then he nodded slowly, his expression unreadable yet steady. "Then you are welcome," he said. "You will have your place among us. Olympus will know you as one of its own." The gods murmured again, voices rising like distant winds. Some faces softened with acceptance, others remained reserved, but none denied her presence. Aphrodite felt the weight of their eyes upon her, yet within herself there was no unease. She stood calm, steady, as though the sea still supported her steps. Her heart beat quietly, each rhythm carrying a sense of belonging. The air within the courtyard shifted. A breeze stirred the gardens, carrying the fragrance of blooming roses and lilies. The petals quivered, some falling lightly to the marble at her feet. She looked down at them, her lips curving faintly into a smile. At that moment, Olympus seemed to breathe with her. The halls gleamed more brightly, the fountains sang more softly, and the flowers opened more fully. Something new had entered their realm, and even the stones seemed to recognize it. The gods returned to their places, speaking low among themselves, but Aphrodite remained where she had first stood. Her gaze wandered across the halls, the gardens, the distant peaks that stretched into the sky. She felt no fear of the heights. Instead, a quiet curiosity filled her, a gentle wonder at what paths would open before her. And as the light of day grew stronger, spilling across the shining marble and the blooming gardens, Aphrodite took her first steps deeper into Olympus, her heart steady, her presence calm, her story only beginning. The halls of Olympus glowed with the brightness of day. Sunlight poured across the marble floors, spilling into gardens where streams of silver water ran softly among blooming flowers. Aphrodite walked slowly, her steps quiet, her gaze calm as she took in the vastness around her. Each sound, each sight, carried its own rhythm. The steady trickle of fountains, the distant song of birds hidden among branches, the faint echo of voices carried in the air. The gods had gathered again, their presence filling the courtyard. Zeus stood at the center, his robe flowing like clouds across his shoulders. Hera rested at his side, crown gleaming. Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, and many others circled near. Their eyes turned toward Aphrodite as she entered, and the air grew still, as though Olympus itself awaited what would follow. Zeus raised his hand, and silence deepened. His voice moved through the space, steady as thunder carried across mountains. "Aphrodite," he said, "you are now among us. Born of the sea, named by the nymphs, welcome to Olympus. But no god stands here without place or purpose. Today you will be honored, and you will be given what belongs to you." The words lingered in the stillness. Aphrodite lowered her head gently, her hair falling forward in a golden wave. She felt the weight of the moment, not as a burden, but as a calm settling into her heart. Hera stepped forward first. Her crown caught the sun, casting small rays of light upon a marble. She carried in her hand a veil, woven from threads finer than silk, shimmering faintly with colors that shifted like soft dawn. She held it out with care. "This is for you," Hera said. "A veil to honor your grace, to shield your beauty when you wish, and to reveal it when you choose. It is not to bind, but to adorn." Aphrodite touched the veil, the fabric smooth beneath her fingers. She raised her eyes to Hera, her voice low but steady. "Thank you," she said. "I will wear it with care." Hera's expression softened, only faintly, but enough to show her acknowledgement. She stepped back, and Athena moved forward next. The goddess of wisdom carried a small golden circlet, simple yet perfect in form. Its shape was unbroken, its gleam quiet but lasting. She held it out. "This is not for rule," Athena said, her voice clear, "but for remembrance. It will rest upon your head, not as a crown, but as a sign. It speaks of thought, a balance of choice. Even love must walk with wisdom." Aphrodite took the circlet, feeling its weight, light yet firm. She placed it gently upon her hair. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "I will remember," she said softly. Apollo stepped forward after her, his lyre resting against his arm. His eyes shone with the warmth of the sun itself. He lifted a string from the lyre, plucking it gently until a golden thread of sound drifted into the air. The note lingered, clear and soft, fading into silence. From the lyre he drew a small pendant, crafted of bright stone, carved into the shape of a flame. "This is yours," he said. "When it rests upon you, music will follow. Wherever you walk, songs will rise and hearts will stir. It will carry joy into silence, Aphrodite accepted the pendant, her fingers curling around its warmth. She felt the faint hum of sound within it, as though it held the memory of the song. She looked at Apollo, her gaze steady. "It is beautiful," she said. "I will treasure it." Hermes was the next to step forward, his staff resting lightly at his side. He carried in his hand a girdle, finely crafted, its surface woven with patterns of gold and silver. The light caught it, and it shimmered faintly as though alive. Hermes' smile curved with ease, yet his eyes carried a deeper knowing. "This is no simple adornment," he said. "It holds a charm. When you wear it, desire will awaken more strongly in those around you. Hearts will turn, and eyes will follow. Use it wisely, for its strength is great." Aphrodite touched the girdle, her hand lingering upon the weave. She understood without words the power it carried. She lifted her gaze to Hermes, speaking softly. "I will not forget its strength." Hermes nodded, his smile unchanged, though his eyes showed quiet respect. Others came as well. Artemis offered her a small bow of silver, not for war, but for sport, light enough to rest easily in her hand. "For moments of play," Artemis said, her voice calm, "when the forest calls to you." Dionysus brought a cup of polished bronze, its rim carved with vines and clusters of grapes. "For joy," he said, "when laughter flows." Hestia offered a small flame carried in a vessel of clay. "For warmth," she whispered, "wherever you dwell." Each gift was placed before Aphrodite, and she accepted them all with quiet grace, her hands moving carefully, her words soft but sure. The space filled with color and light, the fragrance of flowers drifting from the gardens, the sound of water steady and calm. At last, Zeus stepped forward once more. His hand rested upon his staff, his eyes steady as he looked upon her. "You are now complete among us," he said. "You have a name, you have a place, you have gifts to carry. You are Aphrodite, goddess of love, of beauty, of desire. The sea bore you, the earth welcomed you, Olympus now claims you." The gods raised their voices together, not in shout, but in low murmur, a sound that filled the courtyard like the roll of distant waves. It was their way of acknowledgement, their way of binding her among them. Aphrodite stood in the center, her heart calm, her gaze lowered slightly. She felt the presence of each gift upon her, each word lingering within her. She did not speak, for the silence itself was full, carrying more than words could hold. The day moved slowly onward. The sun climbed higher, its warmth spreading across the marble halls. The gods dispersed, returning to their places, their voices fading into the distance. The courtyard grew quiet once more, the fountain singing softly, the breeze lifting the scent of roses into the air. Aphrodite remained where she stood, her hands resting upon the veil, the circlet, the girdle, the flame. She felt each gift, not as weight, but as thread, weaving her into the life of Olympus. She breathed slowly, her eyes lifting toward the shining halls before her. Her path was only beginning. The gifts were not merely tokens, but keys, each one opening doors she had yet to see. She stepped forward at last, her robe flowing behind her, her presence calm, her heart steady. And as she entered deeper into the halls of Olympus, the sense of quiet wonder stirred around her, as though the world itself leaned closer to see what her presence would bring. The days that followed were calm upon Olympus. Aphrodite walked through its shining halls, her steps light upon marble paths, her gaze steady upon gardens that never faded. Wherever she moved, flowers seemed to bloom more brightly. The air carried a softer fragrance, and even the sound of water felt sweeter. Her presence drew eyes, not only for beauty but for the stillness she brought, a calm that lingered in every space she touched. Yet not all hearts rested easily with her arrival. In the quiet corners of Olympus, voices began to stir. The gods were many, their bonds long woven. They had known one another for ages, through trials and triumphs. A new presence, radiant and strong, unsettled the balance. Hera was among the first to feel its weight. She watched Aphrodite with eyes that missed nothing, her crown gleaming as she sat upon her throne. Hera's pride was deep, her dignity long established as queen of the gods. Though she had spoken words of honor, though she had given a veil as a gift, her thoughts often lingered in silence. "She is beautiful," Hera whispered once to herself, her voice low, her gaze sharp. "Too beautiful." The hearts of gods and men will not rest easily. They will wander. Athena, too, carried her own thoughts. She valued wisdom, clarity, and order. Love was not foreign to her, but it moved in ways that broke lines, ways that clouded judgment. She had already seen how eyes followed Aphrodite, how voices faltered when she entered. She watched quietly, her mind weighing, her expression calm but guarded. In the gardens, nymphs spoke softly of her. She walks, and roses open. One said, fingers brushing petals still wet with dew. She smiles, and the air itself changes. Another lowered her voice. But is it a gift or a burden? For hearts may rise, but hearts may also break. Their whispers drifted like wind, light yet steady, carried further than they knew. Even among the gods, curiosity mixed with unease. Dionysus laughed easily in her presence, offering wine and song. Hermes smiled often, his words quick and bright. But beneath laughter and smiles, small shadows lingered. Not all were certain of what her gifts might bring. One afternoon, as the sun spread golden light across the terraces, Hera sat with Athena and Demeter. They gathered in a shaded grove where vines climbed pillars, and pomegranates hung heavy upon branches. The air was cool, filled with the sound of bees humming lazily. She holds too much, Hera said, her voice steady but low. Already, gods speak of her with softened tones. Already, their eyes wander when she passes. Demeter touched a leaf between her fingers, her gaze thoughtful. She carries beauty, yes, but it is not only beauty. The earth itself blooms more brightly when she stands near. Fields answered her. Blossoms open. Even the fruits of my orchard sweeten when her hand passes over them. I cannot call it a curse. Perhaps not curse, Hera replied, her eyes narrowing faintly. But danger, if left without measure. Athena's voice joined then, calm and even. Love is not bound by rules. It moves as it wills, without thought for law or reason. I see strength in her, yes, but strength unchecked can scatter order. Zeus welcomes her, but even he does not know what her presence will awaken. The three sat in silence for a time, the sound of water flowing nearby. Their thoughts wound together, each one shaped by her own view, yet all bound by a common thread of unease. Far away, Aphrodite walked alone through another garden. The air was filled with fragrance, roses and lilies opening wide, their colors deep and bright. She touched a blossom lightly, her fingers brushing its soft petals. Her eyes carried no shadow. She did not hear the whispers that rose in shaded groves, nor the quiet unease that lingered in watchful gazes. Instead, she felt only the calm of the earth beneath her, the warmth of the sun upon her skin, the gentle hum of bees around her. She leaned closer to the flowers, breathing their scent, her lips curving in a faint smile. At times, she wondered at the eyes that followed her. She felt the weight of glances, the hush of voices when she entered. She had not sought it, yet it followed her like a shadow. She thought of Hera's sharp gaze, Athena's steady eyes, Hera's veil resting lightly upon her shoulders. Were they gifts of kindness or of measure? She could not yet tell. In the halls that evening, the gods gathered for feast. The tables stretched wide, filled with fruits, bread, roasted meats, and flowing wine. Torches burned steadily, casting warm light upon stone walls. Music rose from Apollo's lyre, soft and golden, filling the air with steady rhythm. Aphrodite sat among them, her robe flowing in folds of white and gold. The girdle Hermes had given her rest at her waist, shimmering faintly. Her hair caught the torchlight, gleaming like woven strands of fire and sun. Across the table, Ares' eyes lingered on her, steady and unbroken. He lifted his cup slowly, though he did not drink. His gaze carried heat, though no words followed it. Beside him, Hephaestus worked silently at a piece of bronze, his hands steady even at the table, his mind often lost in craft. But his eyes, too, rose toward her at times, thoughtful and unspoken. The music swelled, laughter rose, and voices filled the hall. Yet beneath the sound, threads of silence lingered, carried in glances, in whispers too soft to hear. Some hearts stirred with wonder, others with unease. The air itself seemed to shift around her, both lighter and heavier at once. When the feast ended and torches dimmed, Aphrodite walked once more into the night air. Stars shone above Olympus, bright and countless. The breeze touched her face, cool and steady. She looked upward, her eyes calm, her lips parted in a breath. She did not know yet what paths awaited her, nor what seeds had already been planted by her presence. She felt only the night, the stars, the stillness of the mountain high above the earth. And in the silence of Olympus, the whispers of envy grew, quiet but unbroken, weaving slowly among gods and goddesses, waiting for the moments to come. The morning upon Olympus was clear and calm. Light drifted across the peaks, soft and golden, and the halls glowed as though brushed with fire. Aphrodite rose from her chamber, her robe flowing behind her in folds of white, her hair falling in long waves. She stepped into the gardens, where the air was cool and filled with fragrance. The flowers had opened widely with the dawn, their colors deep and bright, bending gently as if leaning toward her. She breathed slowly, listening to the sound of fountains that poured clear streams into pools of marble. Birds circled above, their songs soft, weaving lightly through the stillness. The peace of Olympus touched her heart, yet her gaze drifted beyond, to the edge of the sky where the earth stretched far below. From where she stood, she could see plains and valleys, rivers curling like silver threads, and seas that shimmered in the sun. The mortal world lay spread beneath her, quiet yet alive, each village and grove touched by its own rhythm. Something stirred within her as she watched, a pull gentle but certain, as though the world itself reached upward to meet her. Later that day, Hermes found her near the terraces, his staff in hand, his eyes bright with knowing. "You watch the earth," he said, his voice light. "Do you feel it?" Aphrodite turned her gaze to him. "I do," she answered softly. "It calls to me. I do not yet understand why." Hermes smiled faintly, his head tilting. "Mortals are quick to sense what is new in the heavens. Already they whisper of you. Already some have lifted their hands in prayer, though they do not yet know your name." Her eyes widened slightly, though her voice remained calm. "They call without knowing. They feel," Hermes replied. "And feeling does not wait for words." That evening, when the stars gathered above Olympus, Aphrodite stood again at the edge of the peak. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She reached outward not with her hands, but with her presence, letting it drift down toward the earth below. She felt rivers moving, forests whispering, fires glowing within homes. And then, faintly, she felt the touch of voices, soft, low, rising from mortal hearts. Far below, in a small village by the sea, a girl knelt upon the sand. She had seen a shell wash ashore, larger and brighter than any she had known. Its surface glimmered faintly with light, though no fire touched it. She held it in her hands, her eyes wide, her breath caught. Something within her heart stirred with wonder. She pressed the shell to her chest, and words rose from her lips without thought. "Whoever you are," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I feel you. Bring kindness here. Bring joy. Bring beauty to our lives." Her prayer carried upward, though she did not know to whom it was given. Others in the village soon saw the shell. They gathered, touching it, speaking softly. They felt in its presence something different, a warmth not of sun, a light not of fire. They placed flowers around it, and by evening they returned with songs, their voices rising into the night. They did not yet speak Aphrodite's name, but their devotion had begun. On Olympus, Aphrodite opened her eyes, her lips parting in a faint breath. She felt it, the touch of their voices, the warmth of their prayers. It was unlike anything she had known. Not the gaze of gods, not the whispers of Olympus, but something simpler, deeper. She placed her hand against her heart, and her expression softened. The following day, Zeus called for her. She entered the great hall, its pillars stretching high, its floor shining with reflected light. The gods were gathered, their faces watchful. Zeus's eyes were steady as he spoke. "Already the world below stirs with your presence," he said. "Mortals feel what you carry, though they do not yet know you. This is your gift. It will grow stronger. But know this, where mortals give devotion, responsibility follows. You must hold it with care." Aphrodite bowed her head gently. "I will," she said. Her voice was calm, Yet within it was the quiet strength of promise. The gods murmured among themselves. Some faces carried acceptance, others unease. Athena's eyes narrowed faintly, as though weighing the meaning. Hera's lips pressed into a thin line, her thoughts unspoken. But no one denied what Zeus had spoken. That night, Aphrodite returned once more to the edge of Olympus. She looked down upon the sea, where the village rested, its small fires glowing faintly. She saw the people gathered near the shore, their voices rising in song, their hands laying flowers upon the sand where the shell rested. Their devotion reached her like a quiet tide. She lifted her hand, and with a breath, she let her blessing fall upon them. Roses bloomed near their homes, fuller and brighter than before. The sea near their shore grew calm, its waves gentle and steady. The villagers felt it, though they did not see her. They smiled, their hearts lighter, their songs warmer. Aphrodite stepped back from the edge, her lips curved in a soft smile. She felt the bond now, a thread woven between heaven and earth. It was fragile, yet strong, carried not by rule or law, but by hearts that opened freely. In the quiet of her chamber, she rested upon her bed, the gifts of the gods near her. She touched the pendant Apollo had given, and it hummed faintly with song. She thought of the villagers' voices, rising in simple devotion. She thought of the shell upon their shore, bright and glimmering, like the cradle that had carried her first steps. Her eyes closed slowly, and she breathed with calm rhythm. The world had begun to know her, and she, in turn, had begun to know the world. And far below, upon the sand of the small village, the people continued their songs, their voices drifting into the night, carrying with them the first mortal devotion to the goddess of love. The days upon Olympus moved in gentle rhythm. Light spilled across the peaks, soft and steady, touching the marble halls, the gardens, and the quiet streams that wound between terraces. Aphrodite walked often among them, her robe flowing like water, her steps light across the polished stone. The air carried warmth wherever she passed, as if the mountain itself bent toward her presence. The gods began to gather near her more often, each drawn in different ways. Some watched silently, others sought her company with words, and some with gifts. Her presence had become part of Olympus, like the fountain that never ceased, like the sky that never dimmed. One morning, beneath the colonnade, Athena stood waiting. Her armor gleamed faintly though no battle called, and her gaze was steady, thoughtful. When Aphrodite approached, the goddess of wisdom inclined her head slightly, her voice calm. "You walk often among the gardens," Athena said. "You are at ease here." Aphrodite paused, her eyes soft, her hands folded before her. "The stillness speaks to me," she replied. "The flowers, the water, the open air. They remind me of where I began." Athena studied her quietly. "The sea carried you," she said, "from foam to form, from silence to voice. That is no small passage." Aphrodite nodded gently, her thoughts quiet. "It was the beginning," she said. "And beginnings are never forgotten." For a time, they stood together, watching the garden as the breeze moved softly among the leaves. Though Athena's eyes were measured, something within her expression shifted, a recognition that the new goddess held not only beauty but memory, strength born of origin. Later, in the grand hall, Apollo greeted her with his lyre in hand. He played softly, each note falling like drops of light. The sound filled the chamber, calm and golden, wrapping gently around those who listened. "I bring a song to the morning," he said with a faint smile. "But when you are near, the melody seems to find itself more easily." Aphrodite tilted her head, her lips curved in a soft smile. "Music carries what words cannot," she said. "It touches without asking." Apollo's eyes brightened. "Then we share alike," he said. "For you to touch without asking." Their laughter rose lightly, drifting across the chamber, unforced and warm. Others listened, their faces softening though they spoke no words. By evening, Hephaestus came forward, carrying a crafted gift. His hands were marked with the signs of his forge, his face touched with soot, yet his eyes held a steady kindness. He placed before Aphrodite a small figure of bronze, shaped with delicate care. It was of a dove, wings outstretched, its form smooth, its balance perfect. "I forged this," he said simply, "not for weight, but for grace." Aphrodite lifted the figure gently, her fingers tracing its shape. She felt the warmth of his labor still held within it. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It feels alive." Hephaestus bowed his head slightly, saying no more, yet a quiet light moved across his face, as though her words had reached a place within him often left untouched. The days continued, each god and goddess meeting her in their own way. Dionysus brought her a cup of wine, rich and fragrant, saying with a laugh, "May it sweeten even further when you taste it." Hermes walked beside her often, telling her of mortal lands, their cities, their voices, their hidden wonders. Demeter guided her to the orchards, showing her fruits heavy on their branches, the earth itself offering gifts. Even Hera, though distant, regarded her with measured eyes. One evening, as the stars began to rise, she spoke quietly, her voice low and steady. "The world has shifted since you came," she said. "The hearts of gods, the hearts of mortals, all move differently now." Aphrodite bowed her head, her tone gentle. "Change comes like the tide. It cannot be stopped, but it can be guided." Hera's gaze lingered, thoughtful, though she said no more. Zeus watched from the high throne, his eyes keen, weighing the movements of all. He spoke rarely to her in those days, but his silence carried its own meaning, like a storm waiting beyond the horizon. One night, the gods gathered in the great hall, torches burning softly, shadows moving along the walls. Music drifted from Apollo's lyre, wine was poured, and the air was filled with low voices. Aphrodite moved among them, presence quiet yet radiant, and those near her felt a gentleness that softened the night. Hestia, keeper of the hearth, leaned close to her then. "You are not only beautiful," she said softly, "you are warm. You are the flame that comforts, not the fire that burns." Aphrodite's eyes shone faintly. "And you are the one who tends it," she replied. "The hearth and the heart are not far apart." The night lingered, voices rising and falling like waves. The gods who once moved in distance now drew nearer, bound not by command, but by quiet threads of affection, curiosity, and wonder. When the gathering ended, Aphrodite returned to her chamber. She set the bronze dove upon her table, beside the pendant of Apollo's song and the flowers that never faded from Demeter's hand. She looked upon them, gifts from gods of different realms, yet each carrying a piece of themselves. She sat in stillness, her thoughts deep and calm. She felt the threads that now stretched between her and the others, fragile yet real, like the first weaving of a tapestry. She touched the dove gently, and its bronze wings glimmered in the faint light. Beyond the chamber walls, Olympus slept in a quiet rhythm, the fires dim, the air cool. But within the silence, something new had taken root. The bonds of Olympus, woven not by decree, but by hearts that had begun to open. And as she closed her eyes, she wondered how strong those bonds might grow, and how they would shape the days yet to come. The sky above Olympus held its usual calm, blue and endless, with soft clouds drifting lazily across its breadth. The marble steps glowed with morning light, and the garden swayed gently in the mountain breeze. Yet beneath the calm surface, unseen threads began to shift. Aphrodite walked the terraces in the early hours, her robe falling lightly across the stone, her hair shining in the sun. Birds trailed in her path, their wings quick, their songs bright. She paused near a fountain, its streams falling with a quiet rhythm, and touched the cool water with her fingertips. The mountain's stillness soothed her, yet she sensed faint currents of something new moving around her, as though the air itself carried a hidden weight. Later that day, Apollo greeted her with his lyre. He played a melody that rose gently, like sunlight touching hills. When the song ended, his eyes rested on her with warmth. "Your presence can even silence a song," he said quietly. She smiled softly. "Music carries the heart of the one who plays it. What I hear is you." Not far away, Ares stood listening. His armor glimmered faintly, though no battle was called. His expression was steady, but within his eyes a sharp light flickered. He turned without speaking, his steps heavy against the stone floor. That night, the gods gathered in the grand hall for a feast. The tables stretched long, lined with golden vessels and dishes filled with fruit, bread, and wine. Torches glowed along the walls, their flames flickering with steady rhythm. Laughter rose at times, though beneath it, other tones lingered. Hephaestus approached Aphrodite quietly, carrying another gift. It was a bracelet, formed of delicate gold threads woven in a circle, each strand fine as a hair, the work precise and flawless. He placed it before her without flourishing. "It is small," he said, "but strong. Like what is hidden." She lifted it gently, her eyes tracing the weave. "It holds beauty in its patience," she said. Her voice was soft, and when she placed the bracelet upon her wrist, her smile warmed. Across the table, Ares's gaze remained fixed upon them. He leaned closer to his cup of wine, his jaw set. Hermes noticed, his eyes quick and knowing. He leaned toward Dionysus, whispering with a faint grin, "Storms gather even in clear skies." Dionysus only chuckled, raising his cup in silence. The feast continued. Apollo played, filling the air with notes that shimmered like falling light. Demeter spoke of harvests, of fields that grew full under her care. Hera watched quietly, her eyes never leaving Aphrodite, her face unreadable. Zeus remained silent, his presence filling the hall even without words. When the feast ended, Aphrodite returned once more to her chamber. She set the bracelet beside the dove of bronze, the pendant of song, the flowers that never faded. Each gift carried a story, each gift carried a bond. She touched them in turn, her heart quiet yet aware of the threads weaving around her, threads that were beginning to tangle. Far from her chamber, Ares walked alone along the outer colonnade. The night air was cool, the stars stretched across the sky in an endless array. His hand gripped the hilt of his sword, though no enemy waited. His voice was low, a whisper only the stone could hear. "She stirs what cannot be stilled," he said. "She turns hearts as easily as the tide." And yet, his words faded, caught between longing and unrest. Elsewhere, in the stillness of her own chamber, Hera spoke to herself softly, her tone calm but edged. "Love reshapes what it touches, and reshaping is never without cost." Zeus sat upon his throne, the fires near him burning low. His eyes lingered upon the dark horizon, as though watching storms that had not yet risen. And in the village by the sea, mortals continued to gather near the shell that glimmered upon the sand. They laid flowers, lit fires, and sang with quiet devotion. Their voices carried upward, reaching Olympus with gentle insistence. Aphrodite felt them in her rest, like a tide that moved even in dreams. The mountain was calm, the air still, the stars bright. Yet within the hearts of gods and mortals alike, threads pulled tighter, weaving patterns unseen, patterns that would not remain hidden for long. The bonds of affection had begun to form. Now the shadows of rivalry, longing, and unease moved quietly beneath them, like currents beneath the sea. And though the night upon Olympus was gentle, a gathering storm lingered unseen, waiting for its hour. The sun rose slowly over Olympus, its light spilling across the white stone halls and tall pillars. The mountain glowed in quiet splendor, and the gardens breathed with fragrance as the breeze moved gently through their blossoms. Yet for Ares, the calm brought no peace. He walked the training grounds alone, his armor gleaming faintly in the morning light. He lifted his spear, striking against the air, the sound sharp, breaking through the stillness. His movements were swift, forceful, but within them was no battle, no enemy. Only a restless fire that could not be stilled. When he paused, his breath heavy, he looked toward the horizon. The world below stretched wide, filled with rivers, mountains, and seas. Yet his gaze turned upward, to the chambers where Aphrodite dwelt. His eyes darkened, and the tightness in his chest deepened. Later that morning, he crossed the gardens, where Aphrodite walked among the flowers. She moved with calm grace, her robe trailing across the grass, her hair catching the sun. She bent to touch a rose, her fingers brushing its petals, and the flowers seemed to bloom more fully beneath her hand. Ares stopped, watching in silence. His voice came low, steady but edged with heat. "Even flowers bend when you pass." Aphrodite straightened, her eyes meeting his. They held no fear, only quiet curiosity. "They respond to care," she said gently. "Not to command." He stepped closer, his armor clinking softly. "Care is not what I know," he admitted. "I know only force. But when I see you, I feel something I cannot name. It burns, yet it does not wound." Her gaze softened, though her voice remained calm. What you feel belongs not to war, but to love. And love does not bend to steel. For a moment, Ares was silent. His hand gripped the shaft of his spear, his jaw tight. Then, with a sudden motion, he thrust the weapon into the ground. The earth trembled faintly at the strike. I would trade 1,000 victories, he said, his voice deep and low, for one glance that is truly mine. Aphrodite looked upon him with gentleness, yet she did not speak at once. The air between them was heavy, charged, yet she remained steady, her presence calm against his fire. Finally, she said softly, "Desire that burns without patience consumes itself." His eyes flashed, but her words lingered. He turned and walked away, his steps heavy, leaving the spear rooted in the soil behind him. That evening, as the stars began to rise, Ares sat alone upon the edge of Olympus. The mountain dropped steeply below. The world spread wide beneath. He leaned upon his knees, his voice low, speaking to the night. "She moves like no other," he whispered. "She sees what no other sees. She does not fear me. She does not yield. And still, she stirs the fire within me." Nearby, Hermes passed quietly, his staff tapping against the stone. He heard the low voice and paused. A faint smile touched his lips, though he spoke only once. "The flame you carry will either warm or destroy. You must choose which." Ares looked toward him sharply, but Hermes had already turned, his steps light, his figure fading into the shadows. In the days that followed, the restlessness of Ares grew more visible. He trained with greater force, his strikes louder, his presence heavier. The other gods watched, their eyes shifting toward Aphrodite in silence. Some carried curiosity, some unease. Apollo spoke to her quietly one evening, his lyre resting in his hands. "Ares looks at you with fire," he said. "Be wary. Flames do not always know their boundaries." Aphrodite listened, her voice soft. "Fire is not only destruction. It is also warm. But it must be tended, or it will be consumed." Apollo's gaze lingered, his expression thoughtful. He played a gentle note, and the sound faded into the night. Far below, in the village by the sea, the mortals continued their devotion. They placed flowers upon the sand, sang their simple songs, and lit their fires. The shell upon the shore glowed faintly in the starlight, its light reaching upward. Aphrodite felt it, even as the storm of Ares's longing pressed closer. She sat alone in her chamber that night, the gifts of the gods near her, the bronze dove, the golden bracelet, the flowers that never faded. She touched them one by one, her heart quiet yet aware of the threads tightening around her. The mountain was calm, the stars endless, the fires dim. But within Olympus, a flame had begun to rise, a flame that would not remain hidden. And though Aphrodite's presence soothed, Ares's restless heart had found no peace. The flame of war had turned toward love, and in that turning, the bonds of Olympus began to shift. The morning upon Olympus opened gently, with clouds drifting low across the peaks and sunlight breaking through in soft streams. The marble halls glimmered faintly, touched by the golden glow, and the garden stirred as dew clung to each leaf. The mountain seemed calm, yet within its halls, new murmurs began to rise. Ares's gaze upon Aphrodite had not gone unnoticed. The fire in his eyes, the restlessness in his steps, the way he lingered near her presence, these were seen by gods and goddesses alike. Whispers moved quietly through colonnades and terraces, not spoken aloud in the great hall, but carried in corners and beneath breath. Hera, watching from her high seat, was the first to voice what others only thought. As she walked with Athena along the edge of the gardens, her tone was low, her words measured. "He is restless," Hera said. "He watches her as if no other exists. It stirs unease." Athena's gaze was calm but sharp. "Restlessness in Ares is nothing new. Yet this is different. His fire is not turned toward battle, but toward her. Such fire burns without reason." Hera's eyes narrowed slightly, the faintest flicker crossing her face. "Love can unsettle as deeply as war," she said. "Perhaps more so. She does not command it, yet it gathers around her." Even mortals below had begun to lift their voices toward her. At that, Athena turned her head, her voice quiet. "Power born of devotion grows swiftly. and it does not always move as the gods would. Elsewhere, Hermes spoke lightly to Dionysus as they walked through the halls, but his words carried weight beneath the jest. "Do you see, Ares?" Hermes asked, his smile thin. He sharpens his blade more than he needs, yet his eyes are never on war. He looks at her as though she is the only prize worth winning. Dionysus raised his cup, his laugh soft and low. Warriors do not know how to drink gently, nor, it seemed, how to love gently. His thirst will either be filled, or it will leave him in ruin. Even Apollo, calm with his lyre, felt the shifting air. He spoke to Hestia one evening as the hearth glowed between them. The flame of the hearth gives warmth to all, steady and constant. But the flame that burns for her is wild. It spreads too quickly. It troubles the balance. Hestia's eyes lingered upon the fire before her. "The hearth is tended each day," she said softly. "But who will tend a flame that refuses care?" While whispers moved among the gods, Aphrodite walked as she always did, her steps light, her presence calm. She tended the flowers in the gardens, listened to the music of Apollo, accepted the crafted gifts of Hephaestus, and heard the soft prayers that rose from the mortal world. Yet she felt the air shifting around her, faint currents of unease pressing close. One evening, as the stars stretched across the sky, she sat upon the terrace. Ares approached, his armor faintly glinting beneath the torchlight. His voice was low, carrying both strength and longing. "You are the only battle I cannot win," he said, "and yet I cannot turn away." She looked at him, her face calm, her tone steady. "This is not a battle," she said. "It is not for conquest. It is not for claim. What you feel is not bound by a sword or spear. It must find gentleness, or it will destroy itself." His jaw tightened, his breath deepened, yet her words held him in silence. He turned away, though his fire did not dim. From the shadows, unseen, Hermes had passed near. His keen eyes took in what he saw, his thoughts swift. By morning, the whispers had grown stronger, carried through Olympus like a soft wind that never ceased. Some spoke of admiration, some of unease, and some of jealousy. For it was not only Ares who looked upon Aphrodite. Others, too, felt the quiet pull of her presence, though they hid it within their own hearts. Zeus heard the whispers, though he did not speak. His gaze from the throne was steady, silent, as though he watched the threads tightening without yet choosing to move. And below, in the mortal world, devotion spread. The villagers by the sea were not alone. In other towns, too, voices lifted in quiet prayer. They laid flowers, sang softly, and spoke of beauty that touched them though they had never seen her. Their words drifted upward, unseen yet felt. Aphrodite heard them in her rest, like distant tides moving against the shore. The mortal devotion grew, even as unrest stirred among the gods. The halls of Olympus glimmered as they always had. The feasts continued, the music played, the gardens bloomed. Yet beneath the calm surface, the air was no longer still. Affection had become longing, longing had become rivalry, and rivalry whispered now through the marble corridors like a secret wind. And in the quiet, Aphrodite felt the weight of eyes upon her, some filled with warmth, some with unease, and some with the sharp edge of jealousy. The forges of Olympus glowed faintly even as the sun rose over the peaks. Smoke curled gently from chimneys of polished stone, carrying the faint scent of molten metal and heated bronze into the morning air. Hephaestus moved among his works, the weight of the hammer familiar in his hands, its surface warm beneath his grip. Each strike of the metal sang quietly, the sound steady, soft, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. He had noticed her more and more. Aphrodite's presence, radiant and unshakable, moved not just the gods around her, but even the very air in which he worked. He watched from the shadows at times, not from envy nor from desire, but from something quieter, a steady, careful attention, the kind that measured the subtle shifts in the world. The flicker of her smile in the gardens, the way her fingers touched the petals of flowers, the gentle tilt of her head when she spoke to Apollo, these small gestures carried weight, and he felt them even across the halls. Today, he set aside his hammer and wiped his hands on a cloth. His eyes followed Aphrodite as she walked past the forge's archways, her robe flowing like sunlight over the polished stone. She moved without sound, yet every footstep seemed to leave a soft echo, a trace of motion in the stillness. He watched as she paused near a small fountain he had crafted long ago, its water clear and steady, reflecting the light in ripples. She bent slightly to trace the water's surface with her fingers, her reflection shimmering faintly beneath her touch. Hephaestus felt a strange tension within himself, not longing, not envy, but a recognition that her presence altered the balance of all things, and he could not simply ignore it. The forge doors opened as Hermes passed by, his staff tapping lightly against the stone. He smiled faintly at Hephaestus. Still watching, he asked softly, though his eyes hinted at something more. Hephaestus did not respond immediately. Not watching, he said finally, his voice low, steady. Observing. There is much that shifts when she walks among us. Hermes chuckled, a quiet sound that rolled easily across the room. Shifts, he repeated. Yes, that is one way to put it. Even Ares cannot hold still around her. I have seen his gaze linger longer than is wise. Hephaestus's jaw tightened faintly. And yet, he believes he understands what moves her heart, he said. His words were quiet, almost swallowed by the sound of water in the fountain and the hum of cooling metal. Hermes shook his head, stepping toward the archway. Understanding is not required. But you, Hephaestus, you watch differently. That is why I leave you to it. And with a faint grin, he was gone, leaving Hephaestus alone with his thoughts and the soft glow of the forge. He returned to his workbench, placing a small piece of bronze in the vise. He hammered carefully, each tap deliberate, the metal slowly taking form under his hands. Yet his mind remained partially elsewhere, following Aphrodite's movements across the courtyard and gardens. He noticed how she spoke to the mortals below, how her presence drew devotion and awe without any command, without the force that often moved others. A quiet moment of reflection passed, broken only by the faint sound of his hammer on metal. He paused to run his hands along the smooth surface of a crafted figure, a small dove in flight, bronze polished to a soft glow. It was his latest gift to her, not for ceremony, but as a token of thoughtfulness. The delicate wings were balanced perfectly, the weight resting lightly in his hands. He imagined her holding it, perhaps pressing her fingers to the curves he had shaped so carefully. Would she see the care embedded in every line? Would she understand, without words, the steady watchfulness with which he had crafted it? He set it aside, and the metal gleamed quietly in the forge's light, still carrying the warmth of his hands. Evening approached, and with it the quiet hum of activity on Olympus. The gods began to gather once more in the great hall, their voices low, the sound drifting down the corridors. Music from Apollo's lyre floated faintly into the forge as Hephaestus moved to polish another piece of bronze, yet his thoughts remained with her. He could not ignore the way others looked at her, the way Ares' eyes lingered, the way Apollo's melody seemed drawn toward her presence, the way Hermes moved with a quiet smile, observing as if he already knew the currents she carried through their world. Even Hera's measured gaze carried a trace of watchfulness, her thoughts quiet but clear in the distance. Hephaestus returned to his bronze dove. He held it carefully, turning it in his hands as if considering its meaning. He thought of the mortal devotion that had begun to rise below, the prayers, the flowers, the soft songs, and he understood, in a way that surprised him, that Aphrodite's influence was no simple power of beauty or desire. It was a gentle force, steady and pervasive, reaching hearts both mortal and divine. The sun had set fully when he left the forge. The torches along the halls were lit, casting warm, flickering light across marble floors. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning the gardens, the fountains, and the quiet paths that wound between columns. She was there, tending the flowers near the eastern terrace, her hands moving with careful patience, her lips curved in a faint smile as she spoke to the small birds that had gathered nearby. Hephaestus's steps faltered slightly, not from hesitation, but from the weight of thought. How could one hold so much presence, so much sway over hearts without even raising her voice? And yet he felt no envy, no desire to compete, only a quiet determination to understand, to see clearly, and to remain steady amidst the currents she stirred. He paused at a short distance, watching without speaking. She glanced briefly in his direction, her eyes calm and unafraid. The faintest tilt of her head, a gentle acknowledgement, passed between them, and he felt the weight of that quiet connection. Hours passed, and the stars rose over Olympus, their light scattering softly across the terraces and gardens. Hephaestus returned to his chamber, carrying the bronze dove carefully. He placed it beside the other gifts already given to her, each piece holding a quiet memory of thought and care. Sitting alone, he considered the currents moving through the hearts of the gods. Desire, devotion, envy, all woven together like threads he could see but not touch. He thought of Ares, restless and burning, of Apollo, whose melodies now carried hints of warmth and admiration, of Hera, whose eyes followed with a measured caution. And he thought of Aphrodite, steady and radiant, the center of currents that even he, for all his skill, could not fully predict. He picked up his hammer again, resting it lightly in his hands. The fire in the forge glimmered faintly, warm and steady. He breathed deeply, letting the calm of the metal and the mountain settle his mind. Outside, the night was quiet, the air soft and cool. The mortals below slept, the fires along the shores of villages flickering low. Their prayers and devotion reached upward in faint echoes, brushing against the edges of Olympus. Hephaestus felt them too, though he said nothing, letting their faith and wonder remain intact, untouched by words. He placed the bronze dove upon the shelf beside him, its wings catching the faint light of the forge. It was a small piece, yet it held within it the quiet power of his attention, of his careful watch. And in that watchfulness, he felt a connection not loud or fiery, but steady and enduring. The mountain slept, the stars moved slowly, and within the stillness of the forge, Hephaestus remained alert, calm and present, his quiet watch continuing long into the night. Somewhere across Olympus, Aphrodite walked through the gardens once more, her presence gentle, her steps soft. The currents she stirred, seen and unseen, moved steadily through the hearts of gods and mortals alike, and Hephaestus, in the quiet of his chamber, knew he would continue to watch them all, as carefully as the metal he shaped with his own hands. The night deepened. The mountain was still, but currents ran quietly, steadily, shaping destinies that would unfold in ways even the god had yet to see. The sun rose slowly over Olympus, spilling golden light across the gardens and marble terraces. Dew clung to the petals of flowers, each one trembling slightly in the morning breeze. Aphrodite walked among them, her robe flowing behind her, her bare feet brushing against the grass. She bent to touch a rose, her fingers tracing the curve of its petals, feeling the cool, velvety softness. A soft hum escaped her lips as she moved, a gentle sound that drifted like wind through the open halls. Even in the early hours, the gods were awake. Ares stood atop a terrace overlooking the training grounds, the morning sun glinting off his armor. His gaze followed Aphrodite as she moved with grace, a presence drawing attention without intention. He felt the fire within him grow stronger, not in anger, but in longing, a desire that twisted quietly, pressing him to act yet holding him back. Aphrodite paused by a fountain that caught the sunlight in a prism of color. Water rippled beneath her touch, falling steadily into the marble basin. She watched the reflection, noticing the small stirrings of life in the garden. A bee moving slowly among blossoms, a bird landing on a nearby branch, and the first mortal prayers drifting upward from the villages below. She sensed their devotion, the soft offerings of flowers and whispered words, and her heart lifted gently. Each act of faith, small and humble, carried a quiet weight she could feel without seeing. Hephaestus emerged from his forge quietly, carrying a small piece of bronze he had shaped the night before. The figure was of a hare in mid-leap, delicate yet strong in its form. He placed it carefully beside a flower she had left in the forge the day prior, not as a gift, but as an acknowledgement of the life and motion she inspired. He watched her from a short distance, noting the way she responded to the morning, the slow, deliberate rhythm in her movements, and the subtle warmth she cast across the spaces she entered. Apollo, moving softly with his lyre in hand, paused in the garden. He strummed a few notes, letting the melody drift around Aphrodite. She turned her gaze toward him, a small smile forming. "Your music finds the spaces I do not yet know," she said gently. Apollo's voice was calm-warm. "It follows you, though I do not command it," he replied. "It listens to the moments you create, the spaces you walk, the life you touch." Even Hera, sitting quietly in the shade of a high colonnade, felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar. Her eyes, steady as ever, softened ever so slightly as she observed Aphrodite moving through the gardens. She did not speak, yet her mind carried a weight of observation, a quiet tension born not of desire, but of recognition, an acknowledgement of the power that rested quietly in presence alone. The day grew warmer. Ares descended from his terrace, moving with careful steps that carried strength without sound. He approached Aphrodite with an intensity in his gaze that she noticed but did not flinch from. "You stir the air around you," he said, his voice low and steady, "and yet you do not even know it." She tilted her head slightly, her eyes meeting him with calm. "I know it now," she said softly, "but it is not my desire to command hearts, Ares. They move of their own accord, as rivers and winds move without asking." He clenched his hands briefly at his sides. "Yet they move, and they follow you," he said. "I am not the only one who cannot look away." Aphrodite smiled faintly, placing a hand lightly on the petals of a nearby rose. "You see what is, and that is enough," she said. "Do not mistake movement for ownership. Desire does not bow to a hand or a sword." Their exchange drew the attention of other gods nearby. Athena observed from a distance, her gaze sharp. She had always respected Ares for his strength, yet now she noticed the restlessness in him, the tension that did not belong to war but to longing. Even Apollo, who had never shown envy, felt the undercurrent, subtle but persistent, as his melody faltered into pauses that were unintended. Far below, in the mortal world, devotion continued to bloom. The villages by the sea were alive with quiet offerings. Flowers, freshly picked, were laid upon the shore beside the shell that had first called their hearts to worship. Fires were lit and tended carefully, and soft songs rose in harmony with the waves. Aphrodite felt the gentle pulse of their attention, the quiet desire to please, and she allowed herself to sense it fully, understanding for the first time the breadth of influence she now held. As the sun began to descend, painting the terraces with hues of orange and pink, Ares lingered in the garden once more. His steps were measured, yet he did not retreat. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "This is no battlefield," he said, "yet the heart fights as fiercely here as it ever did in war. And still, I cannot yield." Aphrodite reached out toward a small bird perched on a branch. It shifted slightly at her approach, but did not flee. Her voice was soft, barely more than a breath. "Desire need not conquer to exist," she said. "It may grow gently if tended with care, but it will burn itself out if forced." Hephaestus, from his place near the fountain, observed the exchange in silence. The quiet in his chest deepened, a mixture of understanding and caution. He knew the threads forming among the gods, the subtle pull of longing and admiration, the gentle rise of envy that followed. And yet, he found in the moments spent observing her a certain calm, a steady rhythm that seemed to anchor the shifting currents around Olympus. By evening, the light had faded, leaving only the warm glow of torches and the soft shimmer of the fountains. Aphrodite moved through the gardens one last time before nightfall, her footsteps light and deliberate. She paused at the edge of a terrace, overlooking the distant seas. The mortal villages below glimmered faintly with the fires they had lit, and their prayers and devotion reached her as a quiet current, soft and steady. Ares stood at the far end of the terrace, his presence heavy, yet restrained. He watched her move, noting the ease of her gestures, the subtle power in her calm. "Even the mortals feel it," he said quietly. "And yet, they do not see all that you are." Aphrodite turned to him slowly, her expression composed. "They see only what they are ready to feel," she said softly, "and in that they discover themselves. Desire grows quietly, like a seed waiting for sunlight. Nothing else needs to be done." The mountain of Olympus was bathed in the soft glow of stars. The gardens exhaled quietly, the fountain's waters rippled in gentle rhythm, and the distant villages below whispered their devotion into the night. Aphrodite stood for a long moment at the terrace edge, sensing the currents among the gods and the mortals alike. Desire had begun to root itself in hearts, spreading quietly, steadily, like the roots of a growing tree beneath the surface of the earth. Even Hephaestus, from his forge, felt the threads extending outward, a web of quiet longing and devotion that was both beautiful and precarious. The gods' hearts were not yet settled. The mortals' prayers were rising, and Aphrodite herself remained calm at the center of it all, her presence both gentle and unyielding. And in that stillness, in the careful rhythm of the evening, the seeds of desire were planted fully, stretching quietly across Olympus, ready to bloom in ways that no one, not even the gods themselves, could yet predict. The sun rose slowly over the distant seas, spilling golden light across the waves. The villages below Olympus were quiet, the soft hum of early morning carrying faintly upward. Mortals moved among their homes, gathering water from streams, tending small gardens, and lighting fires that smoked gently into the calm air. In one village, along a narrow path that led to the shore, a young man walked alone. His steps were deliberate, his eyes lifted toward the horizon, where the mountain of Olympus loomed like a pale, distant dream. He was a messenger by calling, though not yet by experience. His village had few voices brave enough to carry prayer to the gods. Yet the shell that had appeared upon the shore weeks before had drawn him close, a quiet fascination guiding his heart. He carried with him a small basket of offerings, flowers plucked with careful hands, small fruits, and fragrant herbs, all meant to honor the presence he sensed but could not name. As he reached the edge of the sand, he saw the shell once more, glimmering faintly in the morning light. It shimmered as if the sun itself had touched it, its surface smooth, holding an inner glow. He knelt carefully beside it, placing the offerings one by one. The petals brushed against the sand, the fruit rested near the shell, and the herbs released a faint fragrance that drifted upward with the sea breeze. "I do not know your name," he whispered, his voice low and hesitant, "but I feel your presence. I feel it in the warmth of the morning, in the air, in the quiet of the waves. Please, watch over us, bring kindness, bring joy." The shell seemed to shimmer more brightly, reflecting the first rays of the sun. The young man closed his eyes, letting the calm of the shore move through him. He imagined her presence as he had felt it in fleeting glimpses, the quiet pull that rose in his chest, the gentle warmth that touched his thoughts. Meanwhile, on Olympus, Aphrodite rose from her chamber. Her hair fell in long waves across her shoulders, and her robe glimmered faintly in the morning light. She stepped into the gardens, her bare feet brushing against dew-kissed grass, and moved toward the fountain at the center. She bent to touch the water with her fingers, feeling the cool, steady flow beneath her hands. She closed her eyes briefly, sensing currents of devotion reaching upward from the mortal world. Far below, she felt the young man's offerings, the careful placement of each flower and fruit, the quiet words carried with hope. A soft smile touched her lips, gentle and serene. She reached out with the faintest motion, sending a current of warmth and reassurance that flowed downward like sunlight across the waves. The shell shimmered more brightly, though no mortal could see the cause. Ares, moving quietly across the terraces, noticed the calm radiating from her as she stood by the fountain. His gaze followed her, sharp and intense, yet tempered by curiosity rather than anger. "Even the mortals below respond to you," he said quietly to himself. "And still, you remain untouched, unclaimed." Hephaestus, working at his forge, paused to listen to the subtle changes in the air. He could feel the shift, the gentle tug of mortal devotion reaching upward, and he touched a small bronze figure, a dove he had recently crafted. Its wings glimmered faintly, and he felt the resonance of connection with her influence. He returned to shaping another piece, yet his thoughts lingered on the mortal messenger, the care he had shown, and the quiet reach of her presence across worlds. The young man rose from his knees, feeling a calm settle in his chest. He gazed toward the mountain, sensing that his message had been received, though he could not yet name the deity who inspired such warmth. He gathered his basket, leaving behind the petals and fruits as a token of devotion. His steps were lighter, his heart steadier, though he did not yet know the full extent of the presence that had touched him. On Olympus, Aphrodite walked slowly through the gardens, her hands brushing against flowers, her gaze lifted to the distant horizon. She knew the mortal had carried his offering with sincerity, and she held that thought gently. The currents of human devotion were fragile, easily broken, yet they had begun to flow toward her steadily, quietly, like the first streams of spring feeding a river. Apollo approached her then, strumming his lyre softly. The melody drifted across the gardens, calm and deliberate, mingling with the soft hum of fountains and the gentle rustle of leaves. "The mortals feel you," he said softly, "and their hearts carry it upward without knowing why. Even the simplest act of faith reaches you." Aphrodite smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the petals of a nearby rose. "It is not my doing," she said softly. "It is theirs. I only listen and sometimes I guide." From a shadowed corner, Hermes watched the exchange with quiet amusement. "The first messenger," he murmured to himself. "The mortal who carries devotion like a candle in the dark. He does not yet know the currents he moves, yet he begins a path that cannot be stopped." Even Hera observed from a distant terrace, her gaze steady, her expression unchanging. Though her thoughts remained private, she noted the shift in the air, the subtle ripple of attention that passed from mortal to goddess. It was quiet, almost invisible, yet undeniable. As the sun climbed higher, Ares lingered near the garden's edge, watching Aphrodite tend the flowers. His chest tightened, a mixture of longing and restraint. He spoke softly, though she did not immediately turn. "Even mortals below respond to your presence. And still, you remain untouchable, serene in the center of all currents." Aphrodite lifted her gaze toward him, calm and composed. "Desire must grow gently," she said. "Mortals and gods alike feel it. But it is not mine to command. I only tend the spaces where it may flourish." Hephaestus, stepping outside the forge briefly, observed Ares and Aphrodite from a distance. He noted the unspoken tension, the quiet admiration, and the steady devotion that the mortal messenger had shown below. He placed a hand on a bronze pendant nearby, letting its smooth surface remind him of patience, observation, and the slow unfolding of events that must not be forced. By evening, the young messenger returned to his village, carrying a calm in his heart that had not been there before. The mortals around him noticed a subtle change, a quiet light in his eyes. They followed him to the shore once more, adding fresh petals, fresh fruits, and soft whispers to the offerings already laid. The shell glimmered faintly as the night air cooled, its surface reflecting the first pale light of stars above. On Olympus, Aphrodite stood at the edge of the terrace, her gaze lifted toward the distant seas, sensing the flow of mortal devotion and understanding its quiet power. Ares lingered in the shadows, restless yet restrained. Hephaestus returned to his forge, the weight of observation settling comfortably on his shoulders. Even Apollo strummed a quiet tune, allowing the melody to drift softly into the gardens. The night descended gently. Torches along the terraces glimmered, fountains rippled in rhythm with the cool air, and the stars above shimmered steadily. The first mortal messenger had acted, unknowingly carrying devotion and faith across the divide between Earth and Olympus. And Aphrodite, calm and radiant, felt the presence of this new thread in the web of hearts that stretched quietly and steadily, weaving together gods and mortals alike. The morning unfolded slowly over Olympus, soft light spilling across the terraces and gardens. Each flower glimmered with dew, petals trembling as a gentle breeze passed through the trees. Aphrodite moved quietly among them, her robe brushing the grass, bare feet touching the cool earth. She paused by a patch of lilies, their fragrance mingling with the soft scent of jasmine that drifted through the gardens. With a careful hand, she traced the curve of a bloom, feeling its gentle strength beneath her fingers. Ares lingered nearby, hidden partially behind a column. His eyes followed her, not with malice, but with a quiet intensity that had grown steadily over time. Every movement she made seemed to pull at something deep within him, a desire that had taken root quietly and would not be dismissed. The muscles in his arms tensed as he adjusted the strap of his spear, yet he did not step forward. He could not. He was learning slowly that the fire of longing must sometimes be tempered with patience. Aphrodite sensed the presence without turning. The wind carried the weight of his attention, a subtle ripple in the air around her. She smiled faintly, calm and unshaken. "You are learning," she said softly, though her voice carried no accusation, only recognition. He stepped into the open, armor glinting faintly in the early light. "I do not understand," he admitted, his voice low. "Why cannot I claim even a word, a glance, a fleeting touch without it slipping through my hands? You remain constant, and yet the pull is stronger than any battle I have ever known." Aphrodite's gaze was gentle, her hands stilling over the lilies. "Desire is not conquest," she said. "It is a current, sometimes steady, sometimes swift. It must be acknowledged, felt, and allowed to grow in its own way. You cannot force it, Ares. That is the lesson, Hephaestus, working quietly at a bronze fountain nearby, observed the exchange. His hammer rested lightly against his workbench as he watched her, noting the way her presence seemed to organize the very air, drawing hearts without effort, inspiring devotion even in those who had never seen her. He knew the threads of emotion weaving through the gods and mortals alike, subtle and persistent, and he understood the care necessary to maintain balance. Aphrodite moved further into the garden, following a path lined with roses whose petals shifted slightly in the morning breeze. She touched each bloom with deliberate gentleness, noticing the way sunlight fell across them, how their scent mingled with the air. Even the smallest flowers seemed to respond to her touch, their forms aligning in quiet symmetry. Ares followed at a measured distance, his gaze never leaving her form. "Even the flowers bend toward you," he said quietly, "and yet you do not command them. How is it that you move everything without will?" She turned to him slowly, the corners of her lips curving in a faint, serene smile. "I do not command," she said. "I guide gently, and even then, only when it is needed. You confuse influence with control, Ares. One can shape without forcing, touch without taking." Apollo approached from the opposite side of the garden, his lyre in hand. He strummed a few soft notes, letting the melody drift across the flowers, across the fountains, across the quiet paths. The sound was gentle, weaving among the leaves, brushing against the marble of the terrace, and mingling with the hum of bees and the whisper of wind. Aphrodite paused to listen, her eyes lifting to meet him. "You understand the currents," she said softly. "Your music moves with them, not ahead of them, not behind. You hear what flows beneath the surface." Apollo smiled faintly, the soft notes lingering in the air. "I follow where they lead," he said. "But your presence, it is the source." Ares' jaw tightened slightly, but he did not speak. He watched the interaction, feeling the tension of admiration and attention shifting quietly, not in competition, but in recognition of her centrality. Even Hephaestus, silent at his workbench, felt the currents moving more strongly, the threads of hearts intertwining, bending toward the goddess in ways subtle yet undeniable. The mortal messenger from the shore arrived quietly, stepping along a small path that led into the gardens. He carried fresh offerings of flowers, herbs, and fruit, placing them carefully upon a low stone altar near the fountains. His hands trembled faintly with reverence, and he looked up at the goddess with eyes wide and earnest. Aphrodite's gaze softened as she knelt to inspect the offerings. "You carry your heart with care," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying warmth that touched him deeply. "You honor what you feel, and in doing so, you bring it to life. That is devotion, and it is enough." The young mortal's eyes widened further, a faint blush on his cheeks. "Ah, I do not know how to reach you," he said softly. "I can only give what I can, what I feel in my heart." "You reach me in ways you cannot see," she replied. "It is not through sight or words alone, but through the intention and the care you carry. That is how devotion is received." Ares' gaze softened slightly as he observed the exchange, noting the gentle authority in her calm, the subtle influence that did not command but inspired. Even Hephaestus felt it, a quiet acknowledgement of the way hearts could intertwine without conflict, without desire to possess. The garden was alive with movement and sound. Bees hummed over blossoms, water rippled in fountains, leaves rustled in the soft breeze, and the distant call of birds punctuated the quiet rhythm. Aphrodite walked slowly through it all, her hands brushing petals, adjusting a flower's angle, listening to the sounds that rose naturally from the life around her. The young mortal stepped back, bowing slightly before retreating to the edge of the garden. Ares lingered, his presence steady and restrained, while Apollo returned to a shaded path to strum his lyre softly, letting the melody continue to flow like sunlight through the leaves. Hephaestus returned to his bronze work, careful strikes of his hammer echoing softly among the columns. As evening approached, the light softened, casting long shadows across the gardens. Aphrodite paused at the terrace edge, gazing toward the distant seas where the mortal villages lay. She could sense the currents of devotion spreading outward, touching hearts both mortal and divine. The threads of longing, admiration, and care intertwined quietly, weaving a tapestry that stretched across Olympus and beyond. Ares stepped closer to her, his voice low and steady. "All hearts move toward you, yet you remain serene. I do not understand how you hold it all without faltering. Aphrodite turned her gaze toward him, calm and unwavering. Serenity is not the absence of influence, she said. It is the acknowledgement of it. One can guide without owning, one can feel without demanding. That is the balance. Hephaestus, working silently nearby, felt a quiet satisfaction in the measured interactions. He understood the rhythm of hearts, the careful intertwining of mortal devotion, godly attention, and quiet longing. The garden itself seemed to hold its breath in the stillness, alive with the gentle pulse of connection. Night fell slowly over Olympus. The stars glimmered across the sky, and the gardens exhaled softly in the cool air. Aphrodite walked one last time among the flowers, touching petals, listening to the subtle movements of life around her, feeling the threads of hearts intertwining, flowing and growing. The mountain was still, yet alive. The currents of desire, devotion, and quiet longing had taken root in Olympus and beyond, spreading subtly, steadily, impossible to ignore. In the garden, hearts moved gently, entwined by the presence of the goddess, and the rhythm of life continued, calm, deliberate, and full of quiet wonder. The early morning light crept gently over Olympus, brushing the gardens with hues of soft gold and pale pink. The fountains shimmered faintly, their water catching the first rays and scattering them in ripples across marble edges. Aphrodite moved slowly through the gardens, her steps deliberate, yet light, barely disturbing the grass beneath her feet. Each movement felt as though the world paused to accommodate her presence, and the quiet hum of life followed her effortlessly. The rustle of leaves, the soft thrum of bees, the distant murmur of birds rising into the sky. Ares watched her from a shaded terrace, leaning lightly against a column. His gaze followed the gentle sway of her robe, the careful tilt of her head as she inspected each flower, the grace with which she moved without any sign of haste. His chest tightened, not in anger, but in the quiet, persistent ache of desire. Every heartbeat resonated with a rhythm he had never known in war, a steady, insistent echo that pressed gently against the edge of his consciousness. Aphrodite paused near a fountain, running her fingers along its edge and feeling the cool ripple of water beneath her touch. She closed her eyes briefly, sensing currents of attention both mortal and divine flowing around her. The threads were quiet, subtle, yet persistent. Ares' longing, Apollo's music hovering in the air, Hermes' keen observation hidden behind casual movement, the mortal messenger whose faith reached up from the distant villages below. Each presence wove into the space around her, converging in a silent harmony she could feel, but did not need to command. Hephaestus emerged from his forge, his hands lightly dusted with bronze filings. He carried a small creation, the delicate figure of a swan mid-flight. Its wings curved gracefully, the light catching the polish of its metal, giving it a soft glow. He placed it upon a low pedestal near the fountain, his movements quiet, intentional. Aphrodite noticed it immediately, her eyes softening as she traced the contours of the figure. The gesture was small, yet it resonated with subtle significance. It was a gift, but more than that, it was an acknowledgement of presence, a careful attention that spoke without words. Ares stepped closer, finally leaving the shade, the light glinting off his armor, highlighting the steady tension in his muscles. Even Hephaestus notices, he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. And yet you remain untouched, serene, unclaimed. Aphrodite turned her gaze toward him, calm and steady. Serene is not untouched, she said softly. It is the balance of giving attention without taking, of acknowledging without claiming. Desire, admiration, and devotion are not chains. They are currents. They move, intertwine, and flow if one allows them to do so naturally. Apollo's fingers strummed a soft tune on his lyre, letting the melody mingle with the murmur of water and the gentle rustle of the gardens. The music floated lightly, brushing against the flowers, carrying faint vibrations that seemed to echo the quiet pulse of hearts around them. Aphrodite lifted her gaze, letting the sound fill the space. Even music feels your intent, she said to Apollo. It does not follow blindly. It resonates with the currents you perceive. The mortal messenger from the villages arrived once more, carrying fresh offerings of flowers, small fruits, and fragrant herbs. He laid them carefully upon a marble floor, bowing low before the goddess. "Ah, I cannot reach you," he said softly, voice trembling with reverence, "but I offer what I can, what I feel in my heart." Aphrodite knelt to inspect his offerings, touching the petals lightly, letting their fragrance drift around them. "You carry your devotion with care," she said gently. "It is enough. Even unseen, it matters. Even unnoticed, it reaches." The young mortal's eyes widened, and his breath caught. He felt the warmth of her acknowledgement as though it brushed against his very spirit. He did not understand fully how a single presence could ripple so quietly through hearts, both mortal and divine, yet he felt it unmistakably, like a soft wind across the water. Ares' gaze lingered on the exchange, his chest heavy with desire and awe. He understood the quiet power she held, the way attention and admiration were drawn to her, not by force, but by presence. His hands flexed slightly at his sides, the urge to act restrained by the understanding that no sword could claim what was already moving freely in currents unseen. Hephaestus returned to his forge quietly, watching the interplay between the goddess and the others. He could feel the threads of longing, admiration, and devotion intertwining like fine bronze filaments, delicate, strong, persistent. Even the smallest gestures, the faintest currents of attention, contributed to the web she moved within, shaping hearts and wills without command. The sun climbed higher, spilling light across the garden in warm, golden pools. Aphrodite walked deliberately among the fountains, tracing the smooth edges of the water with her fingers. The flowers seemed to respond, bending subtly in her presence, petals opening as if to welcome her touch. The mortal messenger lingered quietly nearby, bowing occasionally, offering gifts in a rhythm that mirrored the flow of the garden itself. Ares approached her again, cautious yet unable to resist. "All hearts move toward you," he said quietly, "and still you do not falter. Even the mortals follow the pulse you set, and the gods cannot help but notice." Aphrodite's eyes lifted toward him, calm and luminous. "I do not set pulses," she said softly. "I only exist within them." Desire grows naturally when it is tended with care, observed without pressure, and allowed to flourish in its own space. Hearts move, and I listen. That is all. Apollo's music drifted around them, the gentle vibration of strings echoing through the gardens, carrying a faint warmth that mingled with the sun's glow. Hephaestus paused in his work, hammer lightly resting against bronze, feeling the resonance of harmony, attention, and devotion converging in quiet, deliberate balance. The garden itself seemed to exhale, leaves rustling softly in the wind, fountains rippling in quiet rhythm, petals trembling with subtle energy. Aphrodite moved among the flowers, touching a lily here, brushing a rose there, listening to the soft sound of life around her. The mortal messenger offered another small bouquet, placing it near a statue she had touched earlier. She accepted it with gentle acknowledgement, letting the faint warmth of her presence ripple outward to touch both mortal and divine hearts alike. Evening began to fall, casting long shadows across the marble terraces. Torches were lit along the garden paths, their flames flickering softly in the cooling air. Aphrodite paused at a terrace edge, gazing toward the distant seas where villages glimmered with the soft light of fires. She could feel the devotion flowing upward, steady and persistent, reaching toward her without demand or force. Ares stood near her side, his armor reflecting the torchlight. "Even now," he murmured, "the currents continue. Desire, devotion, admiration, all moving toward you. And still, you remain calm." Aphrodite smiled faintly, serene as ever. "Calm is not in denying current," she said. "It is in embracing them without attempting to own them. Hearts move freely when they are not commanded. They flourish when they are seen and understood, not possessed." Hephaestus, in the forge nearby, felt a quiet satisfaction. The interplay of hearts, both mortal and divine, was balanced delicately, shaped by presence and acknowledgement rather than force or desire to claim. The currents that intertwined through the gardens, across Olympus, and into the mortal world were subtle, steady, and enduring. Night settled fully over the mountain. Stars shimmered softly across the sky, their light reflecting in fountains, petals, and eyes alike. The mortal messenger left quietly, his offerings placed with care, a sense of calm and purpose resting in his heart. Aphrodite walked slowly among the flowers one final time, touching petals, feeling the subtle ripples of devotion, and sensing the quiet strength of hearts entwined in the currents of attention, longing, and admiration. The garden exhaled softly, alive with quiet energy. Currents of desire, devotion, and subtle yearning intertwined and flowed gently, impossible to ignore. The mountain of Olympus rested beneath the stars, yet the dance of echoed hearts continued, steady, delicate, and full of quiet wonder. Morning broke slowly over Olympus, the light soft and golden as it spilled across the gardens and marble terraces. Petals glistened with dew, and the fountains rippled quietly, reflecting the pale sun like scattered fragments of glass. Aphrodite moved among the flowers, her steps deliberate and unhurried, her robe brushing the grass and her bare feet sinking slightly into the cool earth. Each movement carried the grace of calm certainty and the quiet hum of life. The flutter of leaves, the whisper of wind, the gentle buzz of bees followed her rhythm without disruption. Ares, standing in the shadow of a nearby colonnade, observed her carefully. The ache of desire had deepened over time, now coupled with a subtle tension he could not fully name. He had grown accustomed to the quiet pull of admiration, but today something new stirred within him, a sense that another presence had begun to shift the balance. His gaze darted toward the terrace where Apollo strummed his lyre softly, the music drifting across the garden like warm sunlight. He felt the pull of comparison, subtle but persistent, a whisper of rivalry pressing against the currents of admiration. Aphrodite paused at the edge of a rose bed, running her fingers lightly along a cluster of crimson blooms. Their petals quivered under her touch, delicate yet resilient. She closed her eyes for a moment, sensing currents of devotion and attention moving around her. She felt Ares's presence, steady and intense, and she acknowledged it without moving toward or away. She felt Apollo's quiet admiration in the lingering melody, and she felt Hermes nearby, unseen yet observing, his presence like a soft ripple in the air. Hephaestus emerged from the forge, carrying a small figure of a stag, polished and delicate in his hands. He placed it upon a pedestal near the fountain, the bronze reflecting the soft light of morning. Aphrodite noticed it immediately, and her gaze softened as she traced the smooth contours of its form. It was a gesture of quiet attention, a careful acknowledgement of the subtle interplay of currents around them. Ares's gaze flicked to the bronze stag, tension tightening in his jaw. Even Hephaestus notices everything, he murmured under his breath. And yet, nothing can claim you. Aphrodite turned toward him, her expression calm, unshaken. Attention does not equal possession, she said softly. Desire grows when it is free, when it is acknowledged without command. Hearts move naturally when they are allowed space to feel. Apollo, strumming his lyre in a shaded alcove, let the music drift lazily across the garden. The notes echoed gently in the fountains, the leaves, and even in the air itself. He approached her slowly, a calm smile on his face. "You move everything," he said softly, without effort, without demand. "And yet, even the strongest hearts hesitate before you." Ares's chest tightened, the fire of rivalry sparking faintly within him. "They hesitate, yes," he said quietly, "because you are untouchable. And yet, they are drawn, mortal and divine alike, toward your presence." Aphrodite's gaze met his, serene and unwavering. "Untouchable is not a fortress," she said softly. "It is a reflection of balance, of awareness. Currents move naturally when they are not forced. That is all." The mortal messenger arrived once more, carrying fresh offerings of petals, fruits, and herbs. He placed them carefully upon the altar near the fountains, bowing low in reverence. Aphrodite knelt to inspect them, fingers brushing lightly across the petals. "Your devotion is seen," she whispered. "Even unseen by others, it reaches the heart of what you honor." Ares watched the interaction, tension coiling faintly in his muscles. "Even the mortals notice," he murmured to himself. "Their hearts are drawn toward you before mine can fully respond." Hephaestus, hammer resting lightly against bronze, observed the subtle shifts among the gods. The tension was not loud or violent, but delicate and insistent, a quiet rivalry weaving its way through admiration, desire, and devotion. He recognized the patterns, the currents that intertwined subtly, and he understood that balance required patience and careful attention. Aphrodite moved further into the garden, following a path lined with lilies and roses. She bent to adjust a blossom, feeling the sunlight warm her skin and listening to the soft hum of life around her. Even the smallest flowers seemed to respond to her touch. their petals aligning gently as if acknowledging her presence. Ares approached her, cautious but unable to resist the pull of his feelings. "Your calm stirs more than admiration," he said quietly. "It draws attention in ways I cannot control, and yet I cannot leave." Aphrodite's eyes lifted to meet his, soft and composed. "You are learning," she said. "The fire you feel is natural, but it must be tempered. Rivalry does not nourish desire, it constrains it. Allow currents to flow without grasping, and they will shape themselves." Apollo's melody drifted across the garden again, harmonizing with the fountains and the soft rustle of leaves. He paused in his playing, listening to the subtle tension in the air. Even he could feel the quiet stirrings of rivalry and desire, an intricate dance that shifted with each heartbeat and step. The mortal messenger, watching silently from the edge of the terrace, felt the energy in the air. He did not understand the full scope of what unfolded before him, a complex interplay of divine attention, admiration, and subtle rivalry, but he felt its presence, steady and undeniable. He placed his offerings carefully, stepping back to observe, and a calm warmth settled over his heart. By evening, the garden was bathed in the soft glow of torchlight. The fountain shimmered quietly, petals trembled in the night air, and the stars above reflected faintly in the water's surface. Aphrodite walked slowly along the garden paths, touching flowers, listening to the subtle movements of life around her, feeling the delicate threads of admiration, longing, and rivalry intertwining gently. Ares lingered near her side, restrained yet alert, the fire of desire tempered by understanding. Apollo strummed his lyre softly, letting the melody carry across the garden. Hephaestus returned to his forge, hammer tapping lightly against bronze, maintaining a quiet rhythm. The mountain rested beneath the stars, calm yet alive. Currents of desire, devotion, and subtle rivalry intertwined and flowed, shaping hearts and minds quietly, steadily, and with impossible precision. Aphrodite remained at the center, serene and radiant, guiding without command, nurturing without possession, allowing the dance of hearts to continue with quiet grace. The garden exhaled softly, alive with gentle energy. Currents moved through gods and mortals alike, entwining, echoing, and persisting across Olympus and beyond. Desire, admiration, and rivalry mingled delicately, flowing freely under her watchful presence, impossible to contain, yet perfectly balanced. The first light of dawn spilled softly over Olympus, brushing the gardens with a pale gold that shimmered on every petal and marble edge. Fountains rippled quietly, their waters catching the sun and scattering it in gentle reflections across the terraces. Aphrodite moved slowly among them, her bare feet brushing against dew-laden grass, her robe gliding like a whisper behind her. Each step carried the grace of quiet certainty, the soft rhythm of her presence harmonizing with the hum of life around her, the rustle of leaves, the soft thrum of bees, and the distant calls of birds awakening. She paused at the largest fountain, where water fell from a sculpted nymph's hands into a marble basin below. The liquid caught the light in moving threads, sparkling and translucent. Aphrodite knelt by the fountain's edge, letting her fingers trace the ripples as if feeling their pulse. In the quiet, she could sense currents of attention moving through Olympus, from gods and mortals alike, and she listened to each one, gentle and steady, without judgment or expectation. Ares approached, careful not to disturb the soft symmetry of the morning. His presence was felt in the subtle tightening of the air, the quiet echo of his movement across stone and grass. He did not speak immediately, observing Aphrodite as she touched the fountain and turned her gaze to the rising sun. The ache of desire had deepened, no longer merely a pull at the edges of his consciousness, but a steady rhythm that pressed quietly against his heart. "You move through the day as though it were still," he said softly, "yet every step you take sends currents of longing and admiration in your wake. I feel them, yet I cannot claim them." Aphrodite looked toward him, her eyes calm and luminous. "It is not a matter of claim, Ares," she said quietly. "Currents exist without ownership. They grow, intertwine, and reach hearts naturally. You are feeling only what is already present. Allow it to move, and it will find its path." The fountain rippled in response to a faint breeze, the water catching sunlight in fractured threads that danced across Aphrodite's hands. She traced each reflection, noticing the subtle interplay of light and shadow, warmth and coolness, motion and stillness. Even the smallest ripple carried a rhythm, and she felt it extend outward, brushing against the hearts of all who observed, mortal and divine alike. Apollo's soft notes drifted through the gardens. His lyre strummed delicately in a melody that echoed the fountain's gentle movements. Aphrodite listened briefly, letting the music merge with the sound of water. It was not just sound. It carried intention, subtle and unspoken, threading itself into the quiet attention of gods and mortals. Hermes appeared suddenly from the shaded paths, his steps light and quick, yet measured. He paused at the edge of the fountain, observing the goddess and those gathered quietly around her. Currents are shifting, he murmured to himself, noting the subtle stirrings among Ares, Apollo, and even Hephaestus. Each heart moves differently, but all respond to her presence. It is delicate work, this invisible weaving of attention and admiration. The mortal messenger arrived once more, stepping carefully along the garden paths. He carried a small basket of offerings, fresh petals, sweet-smelling herbs, and a few fruits carefully selected for their color and texture. Each item was placed with deliberate care beside the fountain, the boy's hands trembling faintly with reverence. Aphrodite noticed his approach and allowed a faint smile, gentle and affirming, to touch her lips. "You carry devotion with care," she said softly. "Even when unseen, it reaches. Even when unacknowledged, it matters." The young mortal's chest rose and fell rapidly. "Ah, I wish only to please, to offer what little I can," he said, voice quivering with earnest sincerity. "I do not understand how it reaches you, yet I feel warmth as if it has been received." Aphrodite extended her hand slightly, allowing the faintest brush of her fingertips over the petals. "It has been received," she said. "Intention and care carry more weight than sight or sound. You offer what is true, and that is enough." Ares watched silently, his desire tempered by restraint. The ache within him deepened, an awareness that even the smallest act of devotion from a mortal could stir currents of connection as deeply as any act among gods. He shifted his weight slightly, feeling the quiet tension of admiration and longing converge into something complex, persistent, and unrelenting. Hephaestus, standing near the edge of the fountain, observed the delicate interplay among goddesses, mortals, and gods. His hands rested lightly against a bronze figure of a swan he had placed nearby the day before. The metal caught the morning light, reflecting it faintly across the marble. The swan's wings seemed to echo the gentle currents of attention he felt moving through the garden, subtle and intertwined, delicate yet strong. Aphrodite rose from the fountain, moving through the garden in deliberate steps. She brushed petals gently, adjusted the tilt of a flower, and traced the water's edge with her fingertips. Every gesture was a quiet acknowledgement of life, of attention, of devotion, an unspoken connection that carried through gods and mortals alike. Apollo moved closer, strumming softly on his lyre as he followed her steps. "Even the music responds to your rhythm," he said quietly. "It bends naturally, a reflection of the currents you inspire." Ares stepped forward, hesitant yet drawn inexorably by the pull of his feelings. "Currents shift," he said softly, "yet I feel the pull stronger than ever. Desire and devotion mingle, and I cannot separate what is my own from what is shared by others." Aphrodite's gaze lifted to him, calm and unwavering. "You cannot separate," she said, "because it is not yours alone. Hearts intertwine naturally, moving as they must. Admiration, longing, devotion, these are not possessions, but shared currents that flow freely when they are nurtured without force." Hermes' eyes glimmered with quiet understanding. He had witnessed many subtle shifts in attention among gods and mortals, yet this garden, this moment, was different. It was alive with currents so delicate and persistent that they wove a tapestry no hand could touch. Even rivalry and desire coexisted without disruption, a balance maintained through awareness and gentle care. The mortal messenger placed his final offering, stepping back to observe quietly. He felt warmth ripple through him, a sense of connection that transcended understanding. The garden exhaled around him, the fountain's water rippling, petals quivering softly, the distant call of birds echoing through the quiet morning. By late morning, sunlight had brightened the garden fully, casting long reflections on marble and water alike. Aphrodite moved to the center of the fountains, observing the interplay of currents around her. Ares lingered nearby, restrained yet present, feeling the quiet push and pull of admiration and desire. Apollo's lyre floated faintly in the background, a soft harmony to the murmur of life. Hephaestus returned to his workbench, hammering gently against bronze in a rhythm that matched the natural pulse of the garden. Night began to descend slowly. Stars appeared above, faintly at first, then brighter as the sky deepened into navy and indigo. Torches along the terraces flickered in gentle wind, their warm light reflecting off fountains and petals. The mortal messenger departed quietly, his heart calm and steady, carrying with him the knowledge that his devotion, no matter how small, had touched something greater than himself. Aphrodite walked through the garden one last time before the night fully settled. Her hands brushed petals, her fingers traced rippling water, and her presence infused the air with subtle currents that touched both mortal and divine hearts. Even the smallest gestures, touching a petal, adjusting a flower, listening to a ripple of water, were enough to weave invisible threads that bound attention, admiration, and longing into a delicate, persistent harmony. The mountain rested beneath the stars. Currents of devotion and desire, admiration and subtle rivalry, flowed gently across Olympus and into the mortal world. Aphrodite remained at the center, serene, radiant, and guiding without command, allowing hearts to intertwine and echo across the fountains, impossible to separate, impossible to ignore. The morning unfolded over Olympus with a gentle hush, the kind of quiet that seemed to settle over every leaf and petal, making the world feel as though it held its breath. Sunlight spilled across the marble terraces and fountains, scattering light in faint reflections that danced along the pathways. Aphrodite moved among the flowers, her bare feet brushing the dew-laden grass, her robe trailing softly behind her. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and rose, carried lightly by the breeze. She touched the petals with care, each bloom seeming to respond to her gentle fingers, bending and quivering ever so slightly, as though acknowledging her presence. Ares lingered nearby, his figure partially hidden behind a column, his armor catching the morning light. His gaze never left her, steady and intense, yet tempered by patience. The quiet ache within him had grown over time, deepened by the subtle currents that flowed around her, currents of attention, desire, and admiration from both gods and mortals alike. He understood that even the smallest gestures she made had a weight far beyond their apparent simplicity, and yet he could not claim them, only witness and feel their pull. A faint rustling in the shaded paths drew his attention. He stiffened slightly, sensing a presence that moved with measured steps, deliberate but unfamiliar. Aphrodite, too, paused mid-step, tilting her head as if listening for a sound that was almost imperceptible. The air seemed to hold a quiet tension, subtle but present, like the gentle pause between two notes in a soft melody. From the corner of the garden emerged a figure wrapped in a cloak of pale green, their face partially hidden beneath a hood. The figure walked lightly, each step careful, but not hesitant, as if they had rehearsed the journey countless times in their mind. Aphrodite's eyes softened as she studied the newcomer. There was an air of purpose about them, a quiet strength that did not demand attention, yet could not go unnoticed. "You are far from the mortal villages," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, carried lightly on the breeze. The figure lifted their head slightly, revealing a young woman with hair like autumn leaves and eyes that held a calm determination. "I am no ordinary mortal," she said. "I have been sent to deliver a message, though I do not know if it will reach you as intended." Ares stepped closer, though still cautiously. "And what message carries such weight that it travels unannounced to Olympus?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity. The woman's gaze met his, unwavering and composed. "It is a message of recognition," she replied, her tone quiet but carrying an undeniable authority, "of attention that has been long unnoticed, yet persistent. It is a plea and a gift intertwined, delivered across distance and time." Aphrodite moved slightly toward the fountains, her hands brushing over the rippling water as she considered the visitor. "Recognition is a delicate thing," she said softly. "It carries power, yet must be given and received carefully. Speak, and I will listen." The woman nodded, reaching into her cloak to produce a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She placed it gently on the edge of the fountain. Inside were petals of rare flowers, herbs that exuded a subtle, calming fragrance, and a delicate chain adorned with tiny charms carved from bronze and gold. Each charm reflected faint glimmers of light, catching the morning sun in a way that seemed almost magical. These offerings are not simply gifts, the woman said. They carry intent. They carry hearts that have longed, silently, from distant lands. They carry devotion that has never wavered. Aphrodite knelt, lifting each item carefully, allowing her fingers to trace the edges, feeling the subtle warmth and energy they contained. She sensed the depth of care, the persistence of devotion, and the quiet courage it took to deliver such offerings. These hearts have traveled far, she murmured. And they have reached me. Ares' chest tightened, a mixture of intrigue and unease rising within him. The currents of admiration, longing, and now curiosity converged, twisting faintly like threads in a delicate tapestry. He realized that even he, god of war, could feel the subtle pull of unseen devotion and recognition reaching across space and time. Apollo stepped lightly into the open. His lyre strummed softly in a tune that echoed the fountain's gentle rhythm. The melody seemed to resonate with the new currents, threading through the air, brushing against petals, and carrying faint vibrations that connected goddesses, gods, and visitors alike. The woman lifted her gaze toward Apollo, then to Hephaestus, who had stepped quietly from the forge, observing the scene. Even in places of creation and harmony, the currents are felt, she said. They do not distinguish between mortal or divine. They are guided only by sincerity. Hephaestus nodded slightly, resting a hand against a bronze figure of a swan he had recently placed near the fountain. I understand, he said softly. Even the smallest ripple of devotion can move hearts and shape the currents. It is delicate work, yet enduring. Aphrodite rose, holding the offerings close to her chest. You have carried your devotion well, she said to the visitor, her voice calm and luminous. Even the smallest acts of care travel farther than one can see. You honor what you feel, and it is enough. The woman bowed slightly, her eyes glimmering with a mixture of reverence and quiet satisfaction. I only followed what I knew, she said, what the heart guided me to do. The mortal messenger from the villages, who had arrived earlier and now observed from the edge of the garden, looked on with wide eyes. He could not fully understand the depth of the currents moving through the garden, yet he felt their presence, steady and undeniable. His own devotion, once a simple offering, now seemed to echo in harmony with the newcomer's courage and care. Ares stepped closer to Aphrodite, his voice low, tinged with awe. Even strangers from distant lands carry devotion that reaches you, he murmured. And still, you remain serene, guiding everything without grasping. Aphrodite smiled faintly, radiant and composed. Serenity is not the absence of currents, she said. It is the acknowledgement of them, the allowance of their flow, and the understanding that hearts move naturally when they are nurtured without force. The fountains rippled quietly, the water catching sunlight in dancing reflections. Petals quivered under the morning breeze. The garden exhaled softly, alive with subtle energy, the currents of desire, admiration, and devotion converging in harmony. The visitor lingered a moment longer, watching the interactions with quiet understanding. Then, with a gentle bow, she stepped back toward the shaded paths, leaving Aphrodite with the offerings and the currents they carried. The goddess touched the petals once more, allowing the warmth of devotion to settle gently within her presence. As the day progressed, the garden remained vibrant with life. Birds called softly in the trees, bees hummed among the blossoms, fountains rippled gently in rhythm, and even the gods moved through the space with careful awareness. Currents of attention, longing, and admiration continued to intertwine, subtle and persistent, weaving a tapestry that encompassed mortals and divine alike. Evening approached, the sun dipping low behind distant peaks. Aphrodite walked slowly among the flowers, touching petals, adjusting blooms, and listening to the faint murmurs of water. Ares remained near her side, tempered yet attentive. Apollo's lyre echoed faintly in the garden. Hephaestus returned to his forge, and the mortal messenger departed quietly, carrying the knowledge that his devotion had reached the goddess. The mountain rested beneath the stars, serene and luminous. Currents of desire, devotion, admiration, and newfound recognition flowed freely, entwining hearts, shaping moments, and moving quietly across Olympus and beyond. Aphrodite stood at the center, calm, radiant, and ever watchful, allowing the subtle dance of hearts to continue with quiet grace. The light of late afternoon filtered gently through the trees of Olympus, casting elongated shadows across the garden paths. The fountains murmured quietly, water spilling over sculpted edges and catching the waning sunlight in fractured threads of gold. Aphrodite moved slowly among the blooms, her bare feet brushing the grass, dew lingering faintly on her toes. Each step felt measured, deliberate, yet soft, as if the earth itself recognized her presence and yielded without resistance. Ares followed at a careful distance, his armor catching the sun in subtle glints of bronze and gold. His eyes never left her form, tracing the flow of her movements, the calm composure in her gestures. The quiet ache of longing that had persisted for so long throbbed gently within him, now tempered by awareness, a steady rhythm he could feel in his chest. Apollo's lyre echoed faintly across the garden, soft notes mingling with the whisper of wind through the trees. The melody seemed to trace the gentle arcs of sunlight falling across the marble terraces, echoing in harmony with the soft ripples of the fountains. Aphrodite paused mid-step, letting the music wash over her as she reached a fountain lined with lilies and roses. Her fingers brushed the water's edge, feeling its coolness, tracing subtle ripples as though listening to them. Hephaestus stood nearby, his hands resting lightly against a polished bronze swan that reflected the light in gentle glimmers. His gaze was steady, calm, and observant. He could sense the subtle currents that moved among the goddess and the others, the quiet admiration, the lingering desire, and now something new, threading quietly through them, anticipation. A faint rustle drew their attention toward the shaded paths. The visitor who had arrived earlier appeared once more, this time without a cloak, her hair catching the sun in shades of amber and gold. She carried no offerings, yet her presence alone seemed to stir the garden's currents. Aphrodite's gaze softened, acknowledging the courage and intent that had brought the stranger into her midst again. "You return," Aphrodite said softly, her voice a calm thread in the warm afternoon air. "Why?" The young woman stepped forward, careful yet purposeful. "I wish to see the currents I helped shape," she said quietly. "To witness the threads of devotion, admiration, and desire that move quietly through this place." Ares's jaw tightened faintly, the stirrings of rivalry mingling with curiosity. "Even the smallest mortal can influence the flow," he murmured, partly to himself. The threads of longing, attention, and admiration were delicate, yet the visitor's intent had added a new resonance that he could not ignore. Aphrodite lifted her gaze toward the young woman, calm and composed. "Even the gentlest acts ripple farther than expected," she said softly. "Your presence now is part of the currents, entwined with all else, moving naturally, unforced." Apollo's lyre followed her words with a soft, trembling chord, a reflection of the shifting currents. "Everything responds," he murmured, strumming lightly. "Water, petals, air, and hearts alike." The mortal messenger, standing quietly at the garden's edge, felt the subtle weave of energy deepen. His own offerings had reached Aphrodite before, yet now with the visitor's return, he sensed a layering of devotion and intent, intertwining and strengthening in quiet, persistent harmony. Aphrodite moved to the center of the fountain cluster, letting her hands trail across the rippling water. "The currents do not seek ownership," she said softly. "They flow freely, and hearts respond when they are acknowledged and respected. That is all." Ares stepped closer to her, restrained yet drawn. "Even with all these currents, all these intertwined hearts," he said quietly, "your serenity remains. It does not falter. Even when attention multiplies, you do not lose your balance." Aphrodite's eyes met his, calm and radiant. "Balance comes from understanding, Ares," she said. "It is not in forcing currents to one's favor, but in allowing them to move naturally, acknowledging each without grasping." The visitor watched silently, a faint smile touching her lips. She sensed the subtle dance of admiration, longing, and restraint among gods and mortals alike. Even small gestures, a touch of petals, a ripple of water, a soft chord from a lyre, shifted the currents, intertwining them with quiet elegance. She understood that her presence, though mortal, had become a thread within this tapestry, delicate but persistent. Hephaestus returned to his forge briefly, hammering gently against bronze. Sparks rose faintly, catching the last light of day before the shadows lengthened. Each strike echoed softly, harmonizing with the fountain's murmur, the rustle of petals, and the faint wind through the trees. It was a rhythm that spoke of patience, endurance, and subtle influence, the perfect accompaniment to the currents of hearts entwined around Aphrodite. The sun dipped lower, casting long reflections across the water and marble. Aphrodite knelt by a fountain, adjusting a bloom so that it faced the sun. She breathed in the subtle fragrance of flowers and herbs, feeling the quiet pulses of life and attention around her. Currents of desire, admiration, and devotion rippled outward, brushing lightly against every presence: the gods, the mortals, the returning visitor. Ares' chest tightened, the tension of restrained longing blending with. He realized that even he, god of war, could feel the threads of subtle influence moving beyond himself. The currents were no longer simply admiration or longing. They were entwined, layered with intent, courage, and acknowledgement, moving in quiet, persistent harmony. Apollo's melody drifted over the fountains again, soft, trembling, and precise. Each note carried the echo of attention and desire, resonating with the ripple of water and the gentle rustle of petals. Aphrodite lifted her hands, letting her fingertips skim the fountain's surface. The water seemed to respond, rippling with heightened motion, catching the last sunlight and scattering it in intricate reflections across the garden. The mortal messenger watched in quiet awe, the knowledge settling into him that his small devotion had traveled farther than he had imagined, now intertwined with the visitor's intent, with the currents of the gods, with the rhythm of life itself. Even the smallest heart could shape the unseen threads of attention and longing, as long as it acted with sincerity. By the time evening fully settled over Olympus, the garden glowed in the soft light of torches and stars. Fountains shimmered quietly, petals trembled in the faint night breeze, and the currents of admiration, desire, and recognition wove together seamlessly. Aphrodite walked among the flowers, touching them gently, listening to the whispers of water and wind. Ares remained nearby, restrained yet attentive, his eyes tracing her every movement. Apollo's lyre hummed faintly in harmony, Hephaestus tapped rhythmically at bronze, and the visitor observed quietly, her presence now part of the subtle dance. Night deepened, and the mountain exhaled softly under the stars. Currents of intertwined fates, devotion, admiration, and subtle longing flowed freely, reaching mortal and divine hearts alike. Aphrodite remained at the center, serene, radiant, and unshaken, guiding without command, allowing the delicate dance of hearts to continue with quiet grace, impossible to separate, impossible to ignore. The sky over Olympus deepened into rich indigo, stars shimmering faintly across the heavens. A gentle wind drifted through the gardens, carrying the scent of jasmine, rose, and the faint warmth of the sun's last light. Fountains murmured softly, their waters catching the starlight in ripples that danced quietly across marble basins. Aphrodite moved slowly among the blooms, her steps deliberate, her bare feet brushing against dew-kissed grass. Each movement carried calm certainty, her presence a gentle rhythm that resonated with the quiet pulse of life around her. Ares lingered at the edge of the garden, his gaze fixed on her. The ache of desire, tempered by patience, throbbed steadily in his chest. He had come to understand that her power was not in command, nor in taking what she wanted, but in guiding currents of attention and devotion with quiet, radiant presence. Each subtle gesture, a touch of a petal, the careful adjustment of a bloom, a glance, shaped the hearts around her with delicate precision. Apollo strummed his lyre softly in a shaded alcove, the notes drifting across the garden like golden threads. They mingled with the rustle of leaves, the gentle trickle of fountains, and the faint hum of insects, creating a quiet symphony of the evening. Aphrodite paused near a fountain, letting her fingers trace the rippling water. She closed her eyes briefly, sensing the currents flowing gently around her, the persistent devotion of the mortal messenger, the quiet acknowledgement of the returning visitor, and the layered admiration of the gods themselves. Hephaestus, standing near his bronze creations, observed silently. His hammer rested against his workbench, untouched for a moment, as he felt the subtle interplay of hearts and intentions converging in the garden. Even the smallest gestures, the softest movements of water or light, were woven together into a harmonious whole, impossible to ignore. The mortal visitor stood at the garden's edge, hands folded quietly, her presence now part of the gentle currents that flowed uninterrupted across Olympus. Aphrodite looked toward her, serene and luminous. "You have done well," she said softly. "Even unseen, your devotion has become part of this balance. It is recognized, and it will endure." The mortal bowed, a faint smile brushing her lips. "I only followed the path my heart showed," she said. I did not know it would reach you in this way. Aphrodite's eyes softened as she returned to the fountain. Intent carries far beyond what is expected, she murmured. The smallest currents shape the flow, and hearts respond naturally when they are honored. Ares stepped closer, his chest rising and falling with quiet intensity. Even I, god of war, can feel the subtle pull, he said. Your calm binds everything together, yet you remain untaken, serene, and radiant. I understand now that desire is not possession. It is recognition, attention, and a gentle shaping of what moves freely. Aphrodite's gaze lifted to him, calm and unwavering. Recognition, attention, and care. That is enough, she said softly. Currents do not belong to one heart alone. They flow, intertwine, and continue, enduring as long as they are nurtured with respect. The fountains rippled gently, casting faint reflections across the marble. Petals quivered in the night breeze, and the air itself seemed alive with quiet energy. The mortal messenger, now departing, glanced back with reverent eyes, feeling the warmth of acknowledgment reach deep into his heart. Apollo's melody lingered, soft and delicate, wrapping the garden in a gentle embrace of sound. Aphrodite walked slowly among the flowers one final time, touching petals, listening to the whisper of the fountains, and feeling the persistent currents of admiration, devotion, and subtle longing around her. She sensed Ares' presence nearby, steady and patient, and the layered, enduring attention of Apollo, Hermes, and Hephaestus. Even the mortal visitor, though unseen from the fountains, had left her mark, a quiet thread in the intricate web of connection. Night fully settled over Olympus. Stars reflected faintly in the water, torches flickered along terraces, and the mountain exhaled softly beneath the heavens. Currents of desire, devotion, recognition, and admiration intertwined seamlessly, impossible to separate, yet perfectly balanced. Aphrodite remained at the center, radiant, serene, and calm, guiding without command, allowing the delicate dance of hearts, mortal and divine alike, to continue in harmony. In that quiet garden, under the soft glow of stars, the goddess of love stood surrounded by the threads she nurtured. Each heartbeat, each subtle gesture, each whispered intention flowed freely, intertwining across space and time. And in the stillness, the garden itself seemed to breathe, alive with the enduring power of connection, admiration, and gentle desire, a bond that would continue, unseen but ever present, across Olympus and beyond. Aphrodite finally rested beside the largest fountain, letting the water lap gently against the marble. Her eyes reflected the starlight, calm and infinite, as she closed them briefly, listening to the murmuring currents around her. The night was quiet, yet alive, carrying the unspoken stories of hearts intertwined, devotion extended, and admiration acknowledged. Here, in the center of it all, she remained, the eternal heart of love, serene, radiant, and unshakable. The mountain exhaled softly beneath the stars, and the currents of hearts continued their endless dance, gentle, persistent, and perfectly balanced. The story of love, recognition, and devotion had reached its quiet fulfillment, and the world around her remained calm, immersed, and alive in subtle, unbroken harmony.